poco de confianza y saber que aquí hay familia, pues, comunidad que de cada uno de nosotros.
Una de las palabras que usaría para definir a mi familia es una familia luchadora. Hace 4 años yo nunca haría para definir a mi familia es una familia luchadora. Hace 4 años yo nunca como soy ahora.
Mi sueño más grande es salir adelante con mis estudios y que mi familia siga mía.
United Nations TV is probably some classical or copyright. Salvador Sobral, Mano
Filhos da mesma aflição, dos dois tem alento para dar ao outro uma.
To the units और पहले 200 लोगों को लॉकर जो है वो फ्री मिल रहा है, तो फटाफट कॉल करें एंड बहुत अच्छे इंसेंटिव्स हैं इस प्रोजेक्ट में एंड करना क्या है आपको once again we'll get you the units, will make you, will help you make some dollars. तो आपको कॉल करना है 647-865-7339 पर या फिर हैशटैग होम्स के राहुल कश्यप को कॉल करें 647-993-4844 पर और हम आपको फ्लोर प्लान्स के साथ पूरा का पूरा डिटेल इस प्रोजेक्ट के बारे में देंगे. आप सुनते रहिए, मुस्कुराते रहिए, एंजॉय करते रहिए गीतमाला पारस के साथ on Chin Radio FM 100.7 Monday to Friday 7:30 to 10. आपका मेरा साथ इसी फ्रीक्वेंसी पर बना रहता है और सालों के बाद एक बढ़िया सी स्टोरी आज फिर से आपकी नजर करेंगे, लेकिन फिलहाल बॉबी देओल, उदित नारायण, सुनीता रॉ की आवाज, विजू शाह, मूवी का नाम आप जानते हैं. If you know the name of this movie, call me right now 416-870-1007. That's the number to call. 416-870-1007. हमने लाइंस खोल दी है स्टूडियो की, आपको बताना है इस मूवी का नाम. बस इंतजार कर आपकी कॉल्स का. फोन उठाइए, नंबर घुमाइए 416-870-1007. Let's go T.O.
You know me, I am not for the business. If they push all the freaks kids out even more, good for them.
Really? Yeah, no, Teresa, it doesn't freak my kid out. And at no time has my kid ever been concerned about quarantined crab. I mean, it's a show. It makes kids laugh. And I get the sense that everyone's going to cancel themselves because they're so worried that they'll get canceled by someone else.
I know, cancel culture has now come to poor Bob SpongeBob.
You can't even say it.
I can't even say it. I know. I feel sad, but you know, obviously the big thinkers felt that they had the right to do what they had to do, and so I'm with John. If it was freaking out the kids, then maybe they had to do it.
Yeah, I don't call that big thinking. I call that wimpy thinking. Nonetheless, thank you both for very much for joining us, and wish you a happy Easter or Passover or what it is that you celebrate. Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
That is John Raz joining us and Teresa Cruz. Leave SpongeBob alone. For God's sakes. When we come back, we're going to talk to Blacklock Supporting because we're going to talk about something that does affect everybody. It's a big story. I think it's starting to paint a picture. It's about home ownership and the fact that we keep hearing about capital gains and the authority, the body that is the authority on housing and what they've been doing and why they have been called out. We'll talk to Tom Korski about that in just a second. Stay with us here on Point. I'm Alex Pearson. This is Global News Radio.
And now it's time to go out and take a look at the roads with chopper traffic. Here's Ari Rabinovich.
Still dealing with the trouble spot on the South Don Valley Parkway after an earlier vehicle fire. Emergency crews are still on the scene doing some cleanup. So South DVP up just past Don Mills, 2 right lanes are blocked. The traffic is jammed from just past Eglinton to here. Alternate routes like Bayview are a good idea, and you can rejoin at the DVP ramp. But if you use Don Mills, you'll still have to sit in a little bit of a backup. On the westbound 401 at the off-ramp to here, Ontario, we got a crash there blocking the right lane. Also affecting the in-town stretch of here, Ontario at the 401 some lane.
No, this doesn't help. Tell us about the units, brethren. I need.
इसी तरह से हमारा शो सुनते रहिए, हमें अपना प्यार आशीर्वाद देते रहिए. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Any message that you want to give it to your loved ones? क्या बात है. मस्त रहिए, तंदुरुस्त रहिए, स्वस्थ रहिए, अस्त व्यस्त मत रहिए. Thank you so much.
Traffic. Okay. It's all garbage. Well,
रणधीर साहब ने मूवी का नाम तो बताया. अब ये मुझे पूछना है आप सबसे, जिन्होंने भी सुना, कॉल करके बताओ मुझे भाई, इसमें एक्टर और एक्ट्रेसेस कौन कौन है इस गाने में. 416-870-1007. लेकिन उससे पहले हमारे साथ अब जुड़ चुके हैं बड़े ही बिजी, बड़े ही जबरदस्त इंसान, रियल एस्टेट की दुनिया में बड़ा जाना पहचाना नाम है भाई. बड़े दिल से काम करते हैं और मैं इनके साथ जब भी टीम अप करता हूँ कोई खास प्रोजेक्ट हम लेकर आते हैं जिसमें हम कोलैबोरेट करते हैं. जी हाँ दोस्तों, इस वक्त #HomesRealEstateInc के राहुल कश्यप मेरे साथ जुड़ चुके हैं ऑन एयर. तो जोरदार वर्चुअल तालियों की गड़गड़ाहट से स्वागत करिए राहुल का. हम देते हैं इनको एक टोरंटोनियन गीतमाला एनर्जी विद पारस. वेलकम Rahul, what a great day today. To see the energy is so awesome. Great.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic day. A very exciting and a very busy day. I know आप भी दोपहर से busy हैं, मेरे भी फोन बंद नहीं हुए. I've been on the road because either I am taking calls from
code switching. You switch back and forth between languages like it's one language.
M-City, M4, Tower G. We have already started collecting checks from the clients because guarantee units occupancy and units are in hand, and we have started booking those units right on the spot. Today is day 1, and what a phenomenal project!
I need a mezzanine with a plaza view.
What a launch to M-City, ladies and gentlemen. This is one project जहाँ पर आप जबरदस्त डॉलर छापेंगे दोस्तों. सब मिलकर पैसे बनाएंगे. आपको करना है, हमसे कांटेक्ट करना है. We will give you all the information. This is the project to make money. What do you think, Rahul?
Absolutely, Bert. And the key reason behind that is कि इसकी जो possession date है, वो 2 नहीं, 3 नहीं, 4 नहीं, 5 नहीं, बल्कि 6 साल के बाद है. That's right. 2027 Q1 is when you are supposed to get the occupancy. It's again 6 years, chase out. That's a very, very long time before you get the possession. And it tells you one thing, doesn't matter what happens, another pandemic, lockdowns, or any of that stuff, if that's your concern, guys, it should not be your concern right now because chase out your bot, where the market is, we can't even imagine it because think about it this way. So last year, जब हमारे यहाँ पे pandemic हुआ था and everything got shut down, we didn't know the market is gonna rebound in this way.
The way it's coming back. Oh yeah, now, it's absolutely on fire.
Absolutely. And then the other thing was condos, they took a hit. They absolutely took a hit. But now, I don't know if you have noticed, but I
noticed. Oh my God, my clients have been selling left, right, and center. Left, right, and center. Last week, I sold 2 penthouses downtown core, which were not selling for 6 months. Within a week, boom, done and done.
Yeah, we are starting to see multiple offers. Eastern May prices are skyrocketing all over again. बहुत बढ़ गई है सिंपल रीजन उसका ये है गाइस अफोर्डेबिलिटी वही जो आपका 5 लाख से लेके 7 लाख के बीच में जो स्वीट स्पॉट कहते हैं
and they got them mounted right to the back of the trucks
not
now.
much product available.
Exactly.
Downloads की बात करें या हम semis की बात करें, they have started to kind of get out of reach for a lot of people. So अब उस वजह से अगर हम सिर्फ affordability की बात करें, then it's coming down to the condos. And again, there's not much choices available either in that
they could have used that for Chernobyl.
Concrete M4 just a project आता है जहाँ पे आपकी starting price ही $460,000 से है for a 1-bedroom unit. That's right, guys, $460,000 for 1-bedroom unit with extended deposit structure. आपको सिर्फ 15% का deposit देना है, वो भी 1.5 साल के अंदर. And you have free assignment. You're getting free locker for a limited time, right to lease during occupancy, cap development charges, 1 year free maintenance for selected units. The first 200 units that are going to get signed, they will receive that too. So there's so much going on for this project. Clearly, Rogers, Urban Capital, everybody that's involved in this launch for this, this first phase, they have knocked it out of the park with all these amazing incentives that they're bringing in. So I think that's one of the reasons why everybody's trying to get in this project. And it's so hard to get units right now because everybody wants special units. Everybody wants specific kind of units. You are not going to find that right now unless you have guaranteed units on hand. So again, what do you have to do? You have to deal with the guys who have units. That's it. Horace and myself, we have units available. So you're looking for a 1-bedroom. You're looking for a 1+den or 1+ flex. Or you're looking for a 2-bedroom unit or 2-bedroom plus medium. We have them available, guys. You don't need to worry about it. But these are flying. These units are getting allocated as we speak. Right now, I know my team is working very hard and the bars working really hard.
No,
and these 15. Units are going to go really, really fast.
That's
so
just
if you are looking for a specific floor plan, you're looking for a specific kind of a unit, and you want to book yourself in this first round of signing, which will start taking place from next week. Monday से most likely be signing शुरू हो जाएगी. So we don't have much time left. We're already moving to Thursday and Friday, and we know Saturday, Sunday is going to be extremely busy. So guys, please not करें. आप या मुझे या पारस को contact करते हैं. My direct line is 647-993-4844. 647-993-4844.
You can reach out to me on 647-865-7339. 647-865-7339. Rahul Kashyap, thank you so much. God bless you. कल फिर आपसे बात करेंगे.
Thank you so much, Fred.
Thank you. तो ये थे राहुल कश्यप फ्रॉम #HomeRealEstate भैया बात बड़ी सिंपल है, बड़ा ही जबरदस्त प्रोजेक्ट है. This is one of the top of the line projects of Mississauga, creme de la creme. 1000 units हैं. पहले 200 units के लिए काफी सारे incentives हैं. Units are flying. Everybody is moving fast. And we have guaranteed units.
Moving out the door, brethren.
If you're looking to invest and to make money, this is the project to get into. M4 M City condos in downtown Mississauga. 647-993-4844. Rahul Kashyap को कॉल करिए या फिर पारस भाटिया से बात करें on 647-865-7339. 647-865-7339. Bringing in Sukhwinder Singh, Shreya Ghoshal,
listeners, bro.
Ranbir Kapoor in the house. Let's go.
हर मैदान फतेह दिखला के जिंदा है तू बाकी है तुझ में हौसला तेरी जुनू की आगे अंबर पनाहे मांगे कर डाल तू जो फैसला
टूटी तकदीरें तो क्या टूटी शमशीरें तो क्या टूटी शमशीरों से ही हो हर मैदान फतेह हर मैदान फतेह हर मैदान फतेह बने हर मैदान फतेह
हर मैदान फतेह हर मैदान
There's a fucking guitar in there. I listen to sitar music because I can't stand guitars, eh? Sitars.
Yes,
Glockenspiels over xylophones. Harpsichords over pianos or harps.
We children have to help. Then the work is done faster. My brother takes the vegetables to the market. I've always worked. I never went to school. It wasn't an option for me.
The Kumaris have 6 children who all need to be looked after and fed until they leave home. Puna is 15, and her mother feels it's time she moved out.
The costs of keeping our fumes going are so high, we barely have enough to get by. We would have married her off, but we can't afford a dowry. No one would take her without one.
Sons can eventually bring in an income, but to poor families, daughters are simply an act.
This guitar that I found It's the guitar that's ringing up for me. I'm so sorry.
Time homeschooling kids. So we'll look at that, how our country has changed.
Electricity. This digital divide contributes to social inequality. Experts warn that now the global pandemic is further jeopardizing children's educational opportunities.
The laudable efforts in terms of schooling of children in remote tribal areas. The digital means that even those who have walked to the school in the last decade or so, they are off the map of learning. The infrastructure penetration for receiving digital is not even patchy, it's simply non-existent if we look at the divide of inequality.
There's a whole bunch of Chinese guys here in this school, and
Most
it's
important
like a
challenge that we are facing is
business
the lack of technological devices, the smart devices. There is a huge gap
What are we doing here? We're
between the
burning down
haves and
cell towers for
have-nots.
some reason.
So the children who are not having the internet connectivity or the smart devices, they are definitely lacking in this virtual environment.
In India, education is a privilege not everyone can afford. Fortunately for Ashi, her middle-class family can afford it.
Different eye, Old Testament. Bottom of wells, my heart dwells. Treating these waters like shark tails. My homie got lashed, was all bell. I had
Just
waved
Wally
the shit.
in orange. That's what I should stencil on the back. Wally.
Rats used to sit me
I didn't fucking get it. What I'm doing out here. Why is he looking at those plants? You don't get it. There are no plants here.
Swear to God, I would never
If he
pray to
sees one,
Jesus.
just don't
For the
bother
answers,
him.
I'ma skip the people. Every day I pay for new AKs.
Right, sell you some grapes.
Every day I pay for new AKs. Every day I pay for new AKs. That's Pablo. Every day I pay for new AKs. El Chapo. Every day I pay for new AKs. That's Pablo. Every day I pay for new AKs. El Chapo. Every day I pay for new AKs. That's Pablo. Every day I pay for new AKs. Look, the hottest kid in the kitchen, I've been nice. Shots of you double crossing me, think twice. Gold chains, gold in my mouth, case full of ammunition. Cocaine to my nosebleed, that's a Kathy Griffin. Bullets light up the night sky and they blame me, boy. Magnums in the back of the whip, they call me baby boy. My ATL again sending your section 80, boy. The fuck do you think the mafia pay me for? Young, rich, and handsome, bullets like an anthem. When they started singing, everybody put their hands up. Ain't nobody been doing the shit that I do. Dark boy, how many hoes can I fit inside you? Scratched up with lines of random like the kids of I know. Put up with the Mac and fry them like this shit's a drive-thru. Angels will find you, but I would never pray to Jesus. For the extras, I'ma scrape the beaters. Yeah. Every day I pray for new AKs. Let's Pablo. Every day I pray for new AKs. I'll Chapo. Every day I pray for new AKs. Let's Pablo. Every day I pray for new AKs. I'll Chapo. Every day I pray for new AKs. Let's Pablo. Every day I pray for new AKs. I'll Chapo. Every day I pray for new AKs. Pablo. Every day I pray for new AKs.
Oh, that's distorting nicely. So what's this Great Lake regions of Congo? I gotta look this up. What's going on? There was an inordinate amount of emergency vehicles today. Oh, everybody got paid. No, everybody didn't get paid. Only certain people at certain banks. What happened today? The last 24 hours. This was fucking crazy. Is it the 31st? No, it's the 1st. Yeah, it was today. Okay, I got it. It's okay. Everything was wrong yesterday. They all got paid today. Now they're all fucked up. Where is Chug Chug? We haven't seen Chug Chug in months. There's so many fucking digital problems like that. A couple of crappy videos of little kids, heavy equipment and shit. Some of that's just so perfect. Why is this doing this? What happens if I press this button? Yeah, 20 degrees. Then they turned the building heat on, I guess, before they all left today. Oh yeah, it's nice and hot. I'm not complaining. I can usually like 80 plus something. 84, 83. That button press didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Oh, Asian hour.
GSC. CH.
Shoulda never trouble, and trouble never trouble you.
One of the jobs people
Shoulda
can
never
apply for in
trouble,
the CF
and
is
trouble
musician.
never trouble you. Never trouble you.
I have this subversive mind. I think everybody that's like an independent musician or whatever should apply to the CF, to the musician job, just that job. And if they accept you, refuse it, or they try to get you to switch, be like, nah, I'm on music. But like, music is the thing for me. It's a job.
From my rusty outside, so you seen this shit from day one. Politicking, spilling on my conscience, young nigga. Where the hit our botanists, we do this shit regardless. Keys to your garden, homie, what you guarded. Picking up my checklist, switching up my weapon. I'm afraid of rejection, so I keep it in the barrel of my magnum. Bullets penetrate through cars when I blast them. Hit the club party hard, VIP section. Do a show with the crowd, GSC weapon. OT, blue flag, now everybody's cousins. Real bad boy, you get beat down in public. Police don't got shit, black on black, they love it. Rather see us fight than make lovers out their daughter. Plant a black seed in the trees, it's called mulatto.
I get trouble with furs, never trouble them, never trouble them. I get trouble with furs, never trouble them, never trouble them. So make them come and make me feel.
Lockheed Martin will make the floats to turn a C-130 into a seaplane if you go, so it won't be a C-130 anymore. It's got a different designation. I forget if it's F or L or some shit. If you come up with the money. Canadian Forces found laying in the back of the hangar equipment that will fit in the back of the C-130 that will plant 150,000 trees on each run. Not have to be trees, it could be anything. You want to piss people off? Watch them burn up like a forest or a crop or something to drive people out, and just fly over and reseed it with things that grow back even stronger. Piss people off. Candace, what color should the plane be? Like, no, orange, they'll think it's an ambulance. They'll do some like bright neon pink.
Are we ready for them?
Well, a piece of the duct tape all over it. Just to make them wonder if it's going to fall out the sky.
Niggas better notice on my Mike Tyson shit. Flow so ferocious, I will eat these MCs. There are
That would make that thing blow smoke like a diesel.
The highest of degrees. The shit that I see, the shit that I dreamed about.
See, whiskey class submarine for sale, $500,000.
Where your surroundings are end up in the box. Lost and never found, kid. And that's life. Pay the price. Don't act like you might lose yours tonight. Don't think twice. Get wet up nice. Never drive by. Be on the execution style. Up close and personal. Look him in his eyes.
This got floats. I'll land it in the fucking harbor.
Go pop fly.
I'll land it in the outer.
There's two to go. All enemies, I think you should know.
Idle in. I'll canoe it into the harbor. I'll beat you to Hammond's Point.
Never trouble them. So make them come. Call me ready for them. Call me ready for them.
Radio.
Call me ready again. Call me ready again.
Practice
what you preach. Preach what you practice.
Those the Genesis rockets?
Your camera on the stand spits. Time for a change. Can't leave things as is. Words numbered. I don't relate no man's biz. Tight slip. Tight like a vice grip. I might flip.
These people have millions of dollars. They got, oh, we're going to buy a big cottage. It's still got to work every day. At least get out of the way. Let somebody else make money. You're not even thinking take the lottery money somehow. You just want a chance to have a job. No, I'm going to keep working and have all this money. Dickhead. The reason the government taxes you so much when you start making too much money, hey, like, that's your cue to like chill out.
Never trouble them, never trouble them. I them trouble with first. Never trouble them, never trouble them.
This is going to be pure craziness off CRI, I guarantee. I don't know exactly what format it'll take. Oh, damn it, what is this?
One knock, two knock, three knock, four. No, what's there, so coming in tow. One knock, two knock, three knock, four. I hope my skills coming in tow. One knock, two knock, three knock, four. No, what's there, so coming in tow. One knock, two knock, three knock, four. I hope my skills coming in tow. I don't knock, I don't pick knocks. I kick doors down and let go shots. Put me hot shot, real life nightmare. And the S, I make niggas cry gangster tears. No alcohol, no beer. Like Freddy, I'll kill you in your nightmares. Where the cash at, where the stash at. Fuck around, we gon' find where your girl's at. She's in the strip room.
Keep your little shit, little nigga. I run the dot. Even when I'm OT, my nigga. I run the dot. Nothing gon' change, little nigga. When I'm on the line. Tell every rapper in this motherfucking city that I run the dot. I run this bitch that tried to fill. Race strikes like you're not the only one packing still. Power couple stand on top of the hill like Jack and Jill. Little niggas too young for big mass like Happy Meals. Who the best? Yeah, Dracula blood like we don't check there. In the cut, niggas go what? It's like a check staring. Niggas said boy gon' die, but couldn't get near him. Silence ain't got no sound, like a set hearing. I said before I'm a killer. If I drop a P, you'll see this rain like yellow. We was in the East Detention Project Bounce, that's out to count. When I used to turn myself in with an ounce. If you from the friend, I never would big announce. Back in 04, when Gavin waited around the house, I was hectic. Nigga that said Daddy was playing checkmate. You played it on the bench, we used to give you niggas headspace. Run quarter over to get you out on the next day. Blood on my hand, yo bitch, that's how I get lit. Fucking with your shorty in my priest like He-Man. Like Thomas and Trent can't do it, like yes we can. Keep it 6, nigga, we keep 6. We can handle this like men or get us some G shit. Set tripping niggas switching colors like police sticks. The money that we putting on you, whether you read with, you'll see shit. But if they ones, all I see is a snake ones. The cats I put work in their pocket and got no cake from. If I bust ain't big and no 6 bus, I'll make one. And if that shit don't come easy, nigga, I'll take some. Run the dot. Even when I'm OG, my nigga, run the dot. Nothing gon' change, no nigga, when I'm under lock. Tell us your best friend in this motherfucking city that I run the dot.
I've been trapping all day, trying to find a way to get up out of this. I know that shit don't last long, either I'll be dead and gone or them cups are on my wrist. And I'm just here trying to leave, trying to get up off the streets, and they took my boy from me. I'm out here lonely on the block, cause my homies on lock, this ain't how it's supposed to be.
Niggas know it's terrorist. When push come to shove, we gotta have it. And don't say a word about that thing that spits rapid. Niggas won't hesitate to put his face on the pamphlet. Your hustle's backed up. My hustle been doing backflips. SKs that fold out. Hollows been causing showouts. Rolling with Michelle. Been trapping out of a full house. My family matters like Urkel. We like herbivore. I never heard of y'all. Bullets, they could've murked me, bro. I'm behind that glass till my black knife shatters. Cause emotion in your life, just like Black Lives Matter. I always knew that dreaming came easily. But now I'm having dreams that niggas keep putting heat to me. So I had to take the snub out the box, it was empty. So I had to take the slugs out the socks, FOTG. Niggas know the clan that I fuck with, believe me. It ain't nothing I start dumping. My strap costs 3 bands, shoot like I got 3 hands. Niggas know the deal when we pull up in like 3 bands. A voodoo man trying to shoot me, watch a heat jam, then beat the whole clip of my bullets, they got it.
I've been trapping all day, trying to find a way to get up out of this. I know that shit don't last long, either I'll be dead and gone or them cups are on my wrist. And I'm just here trying to leave, trying to get up off the streets, and they took my boy from me. I'm out here lonely on the block, cause my homies on lock, this ain't how it's supposed to be. I've been trapping all day, trapping all day, trapping all goddamn day, man. I'm just trapping all day, trapping all day, trapping all goddamn day, man. I'm just trapping all day, trapping all day, trapping all goddamn day, man. I'm just trapping all day, fucking trapping all day, trapping all goddamn day.
Penitentiary chances or a casket laid out. Them the only 2 ways the shit plays out. Picket fence foreign shit is wicked in the caged house. Gorillas in the cell picking they braids out. My nigga lock gun, and so is Young Sue. So is Fresh and Mars, tell me who I'm supposed to run to. When I'm in need of a shoulder, when I'm trying to be righteous, but this street life making me colder. Took the white Pyrex nights baked in a soda. Goons pop like you shaking a cola. Wasted a sober when the words out is on. No escaping them rollers. No room for error here. It's one mistake and it's over. But I'm trying to do this rap, that's my word, cuz. Stuck between a dream and these fiends, I gotta serve drugs. 2 options, pick one, the choice is on you. Make sure it ain't the wrong move, it's grand. Yeah, reformers like cowboys, the French like Indians, and royalty like Englishmen. Christians still reading on Corinthians. Red still murders on the Islington. Every day's an incident. Try to talk to niggas, they ain't listening like so be it. To catch the places they was looking, but they don't see it. You see it. Since the hoop that we pushing in that collegiate. Niggas wore purple like Cameron, I really mean it. Tell me I'm a genius. The way I tell these stories like I seen this. I add the hurrah. So the realest, for the Libras. Fuck your horoscope, I got a horoscope. Put it on the top of the rifle with that Ferrari provoke. Never knew niggas would sing until they hit high notes. Wasn't playing ball in 9 to 5, suspension dope. Catch me in the trap house till the minute I cash out. Sipping on Guinnesses, Heinekens, and
I've been
Dragon
trapping all day, trying to find a way to get about it. I know that shit don't last long, either we dead and gone or the cups are on my wrist. And I'm just here trying to leave.
For more than just statistics. These loss of income will mean for millions of people homelessness, perhaps hunger. So the global economy will do relatively well, but individuals might not.
Oh, thanks. So you just say the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So what you said, sir.
Crisis GDP levels by the end of this year. She also says the IMF will raise global growth forecasts for 2021 and 22 next.
The direct payment of $1,400 to most Americans will affect the rest of the world. The American
fuck off. Yeah, because they're going to buy stupid shit off the internet or something. We know.
Chief's latest remarks on the global economy.
It's clearly the outlook has improved overall, but uncertainty is in the middle of everything. And relative to pre-crisis projections, we have to keep in mind that the cumulative loss per capita income will be less 10-11% in advanced economies this year, and for the emerging markets and developing economies, excluding China, it will be even 20%. So the IMF was said clearly, keep an eye out for more than just statistics. These loss of income will mean for millions of people homelessness, perhaps hunger.
Where were you, Shane?
Raise their global forecast for this year and next year. They already more or less foreshadow that. They want to make sure both that the market will not be the only driver to steer this recovery. Both institutions favor guided approach. Governmental policy is the basis, and government should make sure that consumers and businesses will be able to recover. All in all, the IMF and the World Bank are likely to adjust their prognosis upward, and this will be good news for business leaders, capital markets, who will give them confidence.
That was Richard Nave, editor-in-chief of the Banking and Finance magazine in the Netherlands, talking about the outlook of the global economy. China's tapping into the potential of its oceanic resources to develop the marine economy. It's also catching up quickly when it comes to marine technologies. Sui has more.
Chinese engineers have been testing whether the newly designed marine pasture, a huge floating fish farm, is capable of withstanding strong typhoons. After being directly hit by strong winds of over 200 kilometers per hour, they found although all the video sensors that connect the facility with the headquarters were destroyed, its main structure remained intact and all the operations ran as normal. What makes the giant fish farm so resilient is its special design, in which the entire structure is connected by a single chain to the anchor that holds on to the seabed as wind gets stronger. Guo Genxi with the Chinese Academy of Fishery Sciences says the floating fish farm could be a game changer.
It provides a perfect solution to coastal fishing in areas with water depth between 20 meters and 100 meters.
China's inshore fishing capability is believed to lag far behind major oceanic powerhouses, including its neighbor Japan and Nordic countries. Insiders attribute this to a lack of research and monitoring for its marine resources. Now, apart from the progress in building giant floating fish farms, China is also catching up quickly in the design and construction of marine research vessels. The 2,000-ton Nanfeng research vessel has managed to detect 4 million tons of squid in the South China Sea. The more recent Blue Sea ships are capable of sailing as far as Antarctica to conduct research into agriculture, with fewer than 10 countries being capable of doing this. Chen Xuezhong with the Chinese Academy of Fishery Sciences says equipped with all these new facilities and technologies, China can conduct a long overdue regular canvassing of the East China Sea.
It will provide data for the Marine Research Society, which is also China's responsibility as a country with vast coastal areas and marine resources.
The government says in its 14th five-year plan that a better coordinated inshore fishing industry is critical in developing the country's marine economy, with the deployment of marine pastures a priority. So far, over 200 such floating fish farms have been built along China's coastal lines. For the Beijing Hour,
Chinese authorities have announced that regulations on sales of e-cigarettes should refer to those of traditional cigarettes as part of an effort to regulate the industry. Wenjia has more. Conceived as a way for addicted smokers to wean off themselves from smoking, e-cigarettes have become increasingly popular with youngsters in China. Chen Liutong is a respiratory physician in Zhangzhou, Fujian province. He says seeing e-cigarettes as a healthier alternative to traditional cigarettes could be a misconception.
The battery explodes in your face or something.
Due to the lack of regulations, merchants could adjust the content of nicotine to a very high level. This will not help smokers quit smoking, but aggravate smokers' addiction.
After smoking, human brains are stimulated by nicotine. Long-term chronic exposure to the chemical will gradually increase the need for a higher dose, leading to an addiction. Meanwhile, e-cigarettes have used all kinds of spices to provide consumers with different flavors, attracting many minors. As a result, nearly 3% of Chinese middle school students used e-cigarettes in 2019, which is double the percentage 5 years ago. Chen Liutong points out that the spices used in e-cigarettes can also pose a potential health threat.
These spices will produce a certain amount of aerosols in the process of burning, and the composition of the aerosols is very complex. The produced chemicals, including glycol and aldehydes, are some of the currently recognized carcinogens. Therefore, long-term exposure to e-cigarettes is also very harmful to human health.
In 2019, Chinese market regulators banned the online sale of e-cigarettes. Last October, the country rolled out a law prohibiting the sale of e-cigarettes to minors, which will take effect in June. Besides, non-smokers could also be victims of e-cigarettes. Chen says studies suggest e-cigarettes produce a high number of heavy metals in the air, increasing the health risks of passive smokers, especially for those with underlying respiratory diseases.
E-cigarettes will cause air pollution through the smoking process. The particulate matter in the air is obviously higher than the normal range after smoking, and it will cause harm to smokers or non-smokers' respiratory system.
To reduce the harm brought about by e-cigarettes, over 30 countries around the world have banned the sale of the product. By introducing tighter management, many European countries have listed e-cigarettes as a medical product, while many Asian countries have labeled it as tobacco product. In addition, an earlier report suggested that e-cigarette users are 7 times more likely to contract COVID-19 compared to non-smokers. For the Beijing Hour, I'm Wenjie. Coming up, COVID cases are surging in some countries despite vaccine campaigns.
Day one of me quitting cigarettes. I'll fucking kill
stories. Put down that lengthy book spanning thousands of years and instead follow the Makers and Shakers of Chinese History podcast, which presents the biographies of 20 historic figures who shaped the course of ancient China. Meet the most renowned ancient Chinese rulers, ministers, thinkers, scientists, poets, and rebels, and find out how they continue to influence the Chinese to this day. Subscribe to Makers and Shakers of Chinese History for free on your favorite podcast app.
20 minutes past the hour. Many countries around the world are reporting an increase in COVID-19 cases despite continuous vaccine rollouts. In Europe, where a third wave is raging, countries such as Germany and Italy have tightened or maintained their lockdown measures and travel restrictions. Meanwhile, data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention show that more than a dozen states are reporting an uptick in COVID-19 infections, including Alaska, Connecticut, and Delaware. Public health experts are concerned that the United States may witness a COVID-19 resurgence if people do not cautiously follow safety and protective measures. For more on this, Guoyan spoke to Dr. Mary Louise McLaws, professor of epidemiology, healthcare infection and infectious disease control at the University of New South Wales in Australia.
What do you make of the resurgence of the virus at a time when vaccines are being rolled out and massive quarantine measures have been instituted in many countries around the world?
Well, certainly the vaccine program is starting to roll out. However, if we have a look at how fast they're rolling out, they could be doing better. For example, the UK had only recently introduced a quarantine system. So they had people coming and going in their country. Their vaccination started at 2 people per 100, and now they've reached 50 people per 100. They're doing very well, but they need to continue their hard lockdown
Can we like revolutionize something? Ventilate all of our structures. Stop building things with material that grows mold, like
an immune response that isn't a full response. And the U.S., for example, cared about
concrete boarding is dense glass shit, and probably a bunch of other brands.
But both of those countries have really relied on vaccination as a means of control rather than hard lockdown, a lot of cooperation by the public to do physical distancing and mask wearing.
In your view, when can we realistically expect the vaccinations to outpace the spread of the virus and its variants globally?
Well, let's use Israel as the poster country for vaccination. Today, they're up to about 113%. So we're looking for 200%. Other countries like Belgium, France, Germany, and others can get to that enormous level of at least a comparable level of 170,000 infections per day. And they're doing well. I mean, at the moment, the US are doing a daily 3 million a day. And so, nevertheless, that's not enough for a country that has over 300 million people. So they really do need to increase that commensurate with their population size.
With the Easter holidays around the corner, how will travel change the situation?
Travel and people getting together to celebrate, having a public holiday will be a match to a fire. You know, it will increase the potential for a spike in numbers 13 days from the weekend, unless they decide to cancel their celebrations. So, for example, in Australia, we're having a small cluster of 11 cases spread from Brisbane to down to the coast in Byron Bay. And sensibly decided to cancel a music festival. And this is the sort of thing that the UK and Europe, America need to do. They really do need to say to people, this is not an opportunity to have friends and family over unless they're vaccinated.
That was Dr. Mary Louise McClaw from the University of New South Wales on resurging COVID-19 cases amid vaccine hopes. Yemen's received its first batch of coronavirus vaccine from the United Nations-backed COVAX initiative. The 360,000 dose shipment of the AstraZeneca vaccine arrived in Aden on Wednesday with the help of the World Health Organization and UNICEF. Philippe Dumal is the UNICEF representative to Yemen.
Today is a very important day for Yemen as the first batch of COVID vaccines are arriving in the country. And this is a result of a very strong partnership that has been created between the COVAX initiative, which brings together CEPI, Gavi, UNICEF and WHO in a big partnership to make vaccines available to countries around the world.
The shipment produced by the Serum Institute of India is the first batch of 1.9 million doses that Yemen will receive throughout this year. Doctors Without Borders says Yemen's seeing a dramatic influx of critically ill COVID-19 patients as a second wave of the pandemic overwhelms facilities. So far, Yemen's reported more than 3,800 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 810 deaths.
How many people got shot?
Police in New York have arrested a parolee convicted of killing his mother nearly 2 decades ago for the attack on an elderly Asian American woman. Police say Brendan Elliott's been charged with assault and hate crimes for the attack, which took place on Monday near Times Square. Police Commissioner Dermot Shea.
The individual we have arrested in this horrific case, 38-year-old Brandon Elliott, is charged with a completely unprovoked, violent attack on an innocent, defenseless woman.
Police identified the 38-year-old as the man seen on surveillance video kicking and stomping the victim repeatedly. They say he was arrested at a hotel that serves as a homeless shelter a few blocks from the scene, following tips from the public. Manhattan District Attorney Cypress Vance Jr. says prosecutors will seek to have Elliott jailed without bail pending trial.
Mr. Elliott will be arraigned shortly in Manhattan Criminal Court on 2 counts of assault in the 2nd degree as a hate crime and 1 count of attempted assault in the 1st degree as a hate crime. If convicted, he will face up to 25 years in prison, as well as other consequences related to his lifetime parole.
Elliott was convicted of stabbing his mother to death in the Bronx in 2002 when he was 19 years old. He was released from prison in 2019 and is on lifetime parole. France is turning its World Cup stadium into a COVID-19 vaccination center as the country ramps up its vaccine rollout. Workers at the iconic Stade de France on the outskirts of Paris have transformed it into a mega vaccination hub with tents set up for booths. Officials in France aim to open as many as 200 mega vaccination centers that together will administer nearly 2 million jabs per week. French President Emmanuel Macron was scheduled to address the nation on Wednesday evening as France faces surging infection rates and hospitalizations. We're at 28 past the hour. Beijing today expecting cloudy skies and 17 degrees Celsius for a high. The low is 11. Chongqing will be getting a slight rainfall in 20, then it dips to 19. Laos is cloudy and 18 with a low of plus 5. Hong Kong's cloudy and 30 degrees, a low of 25. In North America, Washington, D.C. will have scattered showers on Thursday and 14 degrees Celsius. New York City's getting showers in 13. In Africa, Nairobi is partly cloudy and 26 degrees. And finally, to Oceania, Port Vila is getting thunderstorms in 28 degrees Celsius.
According to this,
time for a short break so far this hour. Chinese officials are refuting allegations that 2 amendments to Hong Kong's basic law will undermine democracy in the city. The IMF says the global economic recovery underway now is increasingly being powered by the U.S. and China. And many countries are reporting a resurgence of COVID-19 cases despite vaccine campaigns.
Why reduce food waste? Blah, 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 blah. Every ton of food waste reduced is equivalent to taking 1 car off the road each year. So if I don't have a car, you should give me a ton of food every year. The car, fuck this $300. I'm not going to get a ton of food for $300. I want $1,100 a year. Cost the average family. Making a weekly meal plan. Wow. Buying fresh fruit and vegetables in smaller amounts. And always having some frozen fruit and vegetables on hand in case you need to have diarrhea or make your dog get mad at you. Using fruits and vegetables past their prime in smoothies, soups, and baked goods. How far past? I don't want to read this. It's disturbing my mentality.
Focuses of the campaign include deepening the understanding of the party's nature and
food
purpose.
Waste by reinvigorating wilted
efforts to strengthen the party's unity through the campaign. The Chinese government will take a series of measures to further advance its reforms. A better employment environment will be created, with the number of professions requiring government-approved licenses to be reduced. Domestic demand will also be boosted with unwarranted restrictions on the cross-city registration of used cars to be overhauled and market access for homestays to be eased. More interprovincial public services will be provided for issues closely related to daily lives, and the development of elderly care facilities will be promoted by involving private sectors to improve services. Preferential tax policies supporting small and micro enterprises and individual businesses will also be optimized. China and Singapore have expressed willingness to further advance cooperation and develop bilateral relations. The agreement was made following talks between Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his Singaporean counterpart. The Chinese Foreign Minister is calling on the 2 countries to work together to oppose vaccine nationalism and jointly upgrade the level of China-ASEAN ties. He said China supports ASEAN to uphold the principles of non-interference in internal affairs and to help cease chaos and resume stability in. The Singaporean foreign minister said the Southeast Asian country is willing to exchange views with China on upgrading the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement and to enhance the level of cooperation between the 2 sides. 2 batches of Chinese COVID-19 vaccines purchased by the Pakistani government have been officially handed over to the South Asian country. One batch was produced by Sinopharm, while the other was produced by CanSino Biologics. Pakistani officials say the 2 batches of vaccines will greatly bolster the nationwide vaccination drive. They say the country has confidence in the efficacy and safety of the vaccines and that it plans to buy more vaccines from China. Peng Chun-shui of the Chinese embassy in Pakistan said China has always made the Asian country a priority in both COVID-19 vaccine aid and export. The diplomat adds that China will continue to stand firmly with Pakistan to pandemic.
Very pathetic.
A batch of COVID-19 vaccines donated by the Chinese government to Sri Lanka has arrived in the South Asian country. The vaccines were produced by Sinopharm. Officials from Sri Lanka thanked China for the donation, saying that it's a very important milestone in the friendship between the two sides. Chinese Ambassador Chi Jianhong says the donation once again shows China's commitment to making its COVID-19 vaccines a global public good. He also expressed appreciation for the Sri Lankan government's decision to include Chinese nationals in its vaccination plan. Yemen's received its first batch of coronavirus vaccine from the United Nations-backed COVAX initiative. The 360,000 dose shipment of the AstraZeneca vaccine arrived in Aden on Wednesday with the help of the World Health Organization and UNICEF. Philippe Dumel is the UNICEF representative to Yemen.
Today is a very important day for Yemen as the first batch of COVID vaccines are arriving in the country. And this is a result of a very strong partnership that has been created between the COVAX initiative, which brings together CEPI, Gavi, UNICEF and WHO in a big partnership to make vaccines available to countries around the world.
The shipment produced by the Serum Institute of India is the first batch of 1.9 million doses that Yemen will receive throughout 2021. Doctors Without Borders says Yemen's seeing a dramatic influx of critically ill COVID-19 patients as a second wave of the pandemic overwhelms medical facilities. So far, Yemen's reported more than 3,800 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 810 deaths. Police in New York have arrested a parolee convicted of killing his mother nearly 2 decades ago for the attack on an elderly Asian American woman. Police say Brandon Elliott's been charged with assault and hate crimes for the attack, which took place on Monday near Times Square. Police Commissioner Dermot Shea.
The individual we have arrested in this horrific case, 38-year-old Brandon Elliott, is charged with a completely unprovoked, violent attack on an innocent, defenseless woman.
Police identified the 38-year-old as the man seen on surveillance video kicking and stomping the victim repeatedly. They say that he was arrested at a hotel that serves as a homeless shelter a few blocks away from the scene, following tips from the public. Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. says prosecutors will seek to have Elliott jailed without bail pending trial.
Mr. Elliott will be arraigned shortly in Manhattan Criminal Court on 2 counts of assault in the second degree as a hate crime and 1 count of attempted assault in the first degree as a hate crime. If convicted, he will face up to 25 years in prison, as well as other consequences related to his lifetime parole.
Elliott was convicted of stabbing his mother to death in the Bronx in 2002 when he was 19 years old. He was released from prison in 2019 and is on lifetime parole. This is Shane Bigham, live from the Chinese capital. Coming up in business, China's manufacturing PMI rose at a faster rate in March.
Beijing Hour brings you an hour of comprehensive news and information from both China and the rest of the world. A mix of news, sports, and entertainment. In-depth analysis of the day's big stories, as well as the most comprehensive business of the day. The Beijing Hour, your very own window to China and the rest of the world.
37 minutes past the hour now. Turning to business, we'll start with a look at the markets. And U.S. stocks finished mixed on Wednesday, buoyed by strong gains in tech names, while weakness in energy and financials weighed on the market. The Dow Jones fell over 0.2%. The S&P 500 rose more than 0.3%. The Nasdaq jumped over 1.5%. Investors are awaiting details of President Joe Biden's infrastructure spending plan, which is expected to include higher taxes on corporations. European stocks closed lower on Wednesday. London's FTSE 100 was down by over 0.8%. France's CAC 40 lost more than 0.3%. Germany's DAX closed flat. Chinese capital markets closed lower on Wednesday, with the benchmark Shanghai Composite Index down 0.4% and the Shenzhen Component Index dropping by nearly 0.8%. Hong Kong stocks also closed lower, with the Hang Seng Index dropping by 0.4%. Elsewhere, Singapore stocks closed lower, with the Straits Times Index going down by 0.2%. In Japan, the Nikkei was down nearly 0.9%. Officials say the primary task of the upcoming Boao Forum for Asia this year is to help reshape growth confidence. Secretary General Li Baodong says it'll be the world's first large-scale on-site international conference this year against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic. More than 2,000 participants are expected at the conference. He says the conference will include 2 new sections, Explore China and BRI Cooperation, which focus on deepening the understanding of China and the Belt and Road Initiative. The 2 modules will also cover China's new development pattern and its impact on the global economic recovery. Experts say the inclusion of Chinese sovereign bonds in the flagship bond index of the FTSE Russell later this year will pave the way for billions of dollars of inflows into China. The London headquartered FTSE Russell announced on Tuesday that Chinese government bonds will be included in the flagship World Government Bond Index, or WBGI. Andre De Silva with the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation says the inclusion will lead to capital inflows of around $130 billion in China's bond market. He adds that compared with the Bloomberg Barclays Global Aggregate Index and JP Morgan Emerging Market Government Bond Index, in which Chinese bonds have been included, BGI has a wider passive investor following. FTSE Russell says hedging against a volatile global market and declining U.S. Treasury yields are the major reasons that investors have poured money into the Chinese bond market. The National Bureau of Statistics says the Purchasing Managers Index for China's manufacturing sector came in at 51.9 in March. That's up from 50.6 in February. Readings above 50 indicate expansion in activity. The Export Orders Index rose to 51.2. That was 2.4 points higher month on month, while the Import Order Index increased by 1.5 points. The accommodation and rental industries, which were hit harder by the pandemic, have also returned to the growth zone. More on this, we're joined by financial analyst Cao Sam. Good morning, and what stood out for you from the index numbers in the different sectors? And we seem to have lost our connection with South End, so we'll see if we can get back to him a little bit later.
I would have too.
An increasing number of coupons are exploring the world of cryptocurrency in Cuba in the wake of U.S. sanctions. Luis Chirino has more.
You could do like a food
Nearly 10,000 Cubans are reportedly using cryptocurrencies for personal transactions, a digital currency increasingly used in the world today. Eric Garcia is a computer programmer and a passionate YouTuber who offers advice on how to get, use, and benefit from cryptocurrencies. El objetivo es que todos los
the idea is that all Cubans understand what this is all about, what they can and can't do with cryptocurrencies, like freely operating with this virtual money in any scenario in the world, which is great.
For the large majority of Cubans, words like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are still very uncommon because their everyday concerns and interests do not yet include the virtual money.
It's not really money.
I've heard about this Bitcoin on the networks, a new virtual payment way, but I don't know if it will be considered for use here in Cuba.
Yes, I've heard about it, but very little. I've heard it's a new currency, but nothing else.
Garcia says the increase of internet access over the past 3 years on the island, along with the chance to avoid U.S. financial restrictions, could encourage Cubans to turn to the virtual money.
Many Cubans have found in cryptocurrencies their solution to buy products and pay for services on the internet, invest in trading options or gain money, and finance other projects, which you can't do through traditional payment systems.
Eyonis Gonzalez is a private worker in the information technology sector.
I think they said the planet was overheating specifically because of the amount of electricity
from
we
internet
use.
providers who accept cryptocurrencies, since the US embargo prevents us from using traditional payment methods like Visa, MasterCard, or PayPal. So these alternatives allow me to develop my business.
The role of cryptocurrencies in the global economy could become increasingly attractive for Cubans in the future as they search for other options instead of using traditional physical money to make online purchases, trade, and invest.
That was Luis Trina reporting on the increasing use of coupons in Cuba. Back to our story on the NBS stats on the purchasing managers index for China's manufacturing sector came at 51.9 in March, up from 50.6 in February. And so now once again, we're joined with our financial analyst, Sam. So what stood out for you, first of all, from the index numbers in the different sectors?
Well, what stood out for me is that both import and export sectors have recovered quite substantially, despite the recent blockage of the Suez Canal. We've seen that the export demand is picking up. We're also seeing that domestic demand is also picking up. And what concerns me is the growth trajectory. Because we know there's a shortage of everything. There's a shortage of computer chips, there's a shortage of containers. The price rate has gone up substantially. So unless there's a substantial ramp up of the supply of these commodities, then the global trade will still be under strain.
Well, after dropping for 3 consecutive months, why did the index bounce back last month?
Well, we have to take into account the Lunar New Year, and the fact that we've seen substantial fiscal stimulus coming from the U.S.
To the world. They're not going to stop.
You know, right after Biden administration took office, there's a lot of stimulus checks. So that helps stimulate consumer spending and consumer demand, and especially the export sector.
What are your thoughts on how sustainable this growth momentum can be for China, considering that we're, I guess, entering the post-pandemic era?
Well, for China, I think it looks good, but still, I think the inflation pressure is picking up. We're seeing that the price for many commodities, including oil, has gone up quite a bit. So we need to watch closely.
What they're doing here is just simply not mentioning the, I want to say,
and its potential impact on the future trajectory of the interest rate.
Forced labor.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. That's financial analyst Sam commenting on China's PMI figure last month.
Hong Kong.
The Chinese government has shifted a special poverty alleviation fund into a subsidy fund for promoting its rural revitalization strategy. It aims to help underdeveloped regions to maintain stable financial support in the development of rural areas and prevent a return to poverty. The Ministry of Finance says the central government's arranged over 150 billion yuan for the fund in the budget this year. That's up by 10 billion yuan from a year earlier. The fund will be mainly used for supporting industries with distinctive local features and advantages. You're listening to the Beijing Hour. Coming up in sports, test events at Olympic ice venues in Beijing. It's 47 past the hour now. Turning to sports, here's Young.
Thank you, Shane. With 310 days to go before the opening ceremony of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, organizers have announced that test events on all ice venues of the Games will kick off from today to April 10th. Beijing Winter Olympic Organizing Committee official Zhao Weidong says the test events will help them gain key experience for hosting the Winter Games.
Hosting the test events is one of the major ways to find and solve issues and problems ahead of the actual Olympics. The test is to find the problems, so we need to find through the test events the problems in our preparations for the Olympics, so that we can better improve and fine-tune our work to lay a good foundation for perfect Olympics.
Over 440.
The common cold mutated by vaccine.
I'm standing inside the Spence Diamonds showroom, and wow, love is in the air. Excuse me, how are you liking the Spence experience?
This could be the best day of my life. Sorry, I promised I wouldn't cry. Is the diamond right here, or is it just me?
We go into the desert of doom. We climb up the cliff. We go zoom.
into this cave. And always the treasure is something that me and my little sister really like pretty stones and stuff. My dad also puts 2 sweeties for each one. My mama and my papa also read a lot of books.
Yes, my foot's doing that to itself right now.
A lot of books.
Damn it.
I don't like lockdown because
my kids were in school. Joining me now, 2 of our network colleagues, one from the West Coast, one from Winnipeg. Jumi Dapo-Gansala is with us from Vancouver, and Loren McNabb is with us from Winnipeg. Both of you, parents, kids, so not only are you pulling off the radio thing, you are still chasing kids, and everybody's at home and it's busy. Loren, how did this start for you a year ago with COVID, when you had that moment of,
over the FM radio,
my kids are going to be at home,
so why are we
I might have to work at
Why
home,
are we not
what am I going to do? How did that hit you?
I had already been at home about a week, I think maybe 2 weeks, when our education minister in Manitoba made that announcement. And you knew it was coming, but I recorded the video on my iPhone, and I'm not sure why, because my kids were already home by then, and my breath caught in my throat, and I immediately just thought, it was one of those rare times or early times where I thought, I don't know if I've got this. You try to convince yourself as a parent, like, I can do this, it'll be fine, it's going to be okay. And you're saying all the right things, but I can remember the date, it was March 31st, and my breath just caught, and I thought, oh my, what are we going to do? And it's crazy because I'm working from home, I have privilege to be at home, my husband's at home, but all I could think was, they're here, and now I have to keep them smart, and I have to keep them going, and I have to do math. And I just felt such a feeling of like a noise, like white noise in my brain.
Now, Jumi, when this happened for you, your show producer on the national show with Charles Adler, so you were working in the evenings already. I know that you catching your bus to get home because you worked late evenings. So that was a stress with the children, but now you've got the children all day, you're working from home, and you've kept them at home, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And honestly, when this whole thing happened last year, it was during the spring break that we knew we were not going to be returning to school, and then having to
to keep an eye on, such as the Atlanta Braves, the San Diego Padres, the Chicago White Sox, and the New York Mets, but of course, the very successful teams over the years, such as the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, are also definitely very exciting teams to watch in the 2021 season.
There was Brandon Yates' preview on the Golf WGC Texas tournament and the Major League Baseball season openers. In tennis action from the Miami Open, Maria Sakkari brought Naomi Osaka's 23-match winning streak to end in style. Sakkari took just over an hour to claim a 6-love 6.
Is that 15 each?
We peacekeepers themselves, we are away from our homes, and we are here, we are daily basis, we are interacting with the traumatized individuals. So I used to run certain stress management program for my own people, for myself as well.
Something ridiculous. Specifically shaped to fix my foot. My foot is not right. It's left. My left foot is not right. There we go.
I call to order the United Nations Summit on Biodiversity under the overall theme of Urgent Action on Biodiversity for Sustainable Development.
Tell us about Bollywood.
I will now make a statement as the President of the General Assembly from the rostrum.
CRI. Come on, radio roulette.
Opera was when I decided to take it up.
This phenomenon wasn't just limited to Shu's family members.
当时5块钱一张票。
My name is Shu. You should come to Toronto and open up a store called
There was hardly anyone who wanted to buy tickets to see our performances then.
Even if there was an audience, most of them were older people.
Shi says he saw an uptick in attention around 2001 when Quench Opera was listed as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage.
With UNESCO's listing and our country's support, more and more people go to theatre and enjoy the traditional art.
In order to reach the idea that only old people can appreciate Quench, artists like Shi have gotten creative.
传承传统剧目，然后编演新编戏，并且推上舞台的这样一个主要的运营的方式。
We're cultivating young artists to pass on the tradition. We're also producing operas with more contemporary themes like the fight against COVID-19 in order to get closer to younger audiences.
With the Quench Opera having found a new appeal, she says he believes the art form could maintain this vitality and live a much longer life.
That was Wang Mengjie reporting. 55 past the hour, a 9-sided well with a history of over 2,000 years has been discovered in Shanxi province. The wooden well is 9 meters deep and 4.5 meters wide at the mouth. It's believed to be the largest and best preserved well of the late Warring States period in the country. Many wooden slabs and fragments have also been found in the well. Experts say the discovery is of great significance to understanding the masonry technology of ancient wells and research into early wooden structures. American comedian Marina Franklin says competition among female comedians has become less intense, and many of them have formed supportive friendships that have helped them personally and professionally. Franklin's one of many female stand-up comics featured in the new FX documentary Hysterical. The film shares the history of women in comedy and many challenges of being female in a male-dominated business that often shut women out. Franklin says that she's witnessed changes in the past years.
About 10 years in, I started to see a number of female comics that I could do that with and share with. And so, you know, I even started my podcast because of it, because I said, you know what, look at this.
Do we get angry called? No.
Back. Are you better for it?
I would say totally. And, you know, it's not what I would want to happen because the pandemic has really upended every aspect of our lives. It's not what I would want to repeat of, but honestly, it gave me that bonus time with the kids. I was able, you know, like, you know, I close at 10 p.m. every night, and I know that I try to get them, you know, that commute time of getting them from school, getting them to school in the morning, not seeing them go to bed at night, you know. I was able to be part of their lives consistently every day for the last 1 year, which I'm very, very grateful for. And it also allowed me to appreciate the kids more, because when this whole thing started, my major concern was about how these kids will adapt. You know, not seeing their friends, not being able to go out, putting on the mask and all of those things. But, you know, it's interesting how kids are very flexible and are quick to understand, you know, and they became a part of my work.
65% non-breathing,
you know, my kids watch the news and they're always like, Mom, you might need this for your show later in the evening. You know, so for me, that really, they got into the whole drift of what my work entails. They can tell what's happening and they were able to help me. So they brought inspiration to me as well.
System management are core to sustainable development. It must provide a platform to private sector to invest in the protection and promotion of biodiversity, not in its elimination. It must engage civil society and transform their role from an activist to a partner. Excellencies, I assure you that I will support and stand firmly behind this agenda. I hope you recognize that there is every reason, either from a moral standpoint or from an economic standpoint, and also from an existential standpoint, to protect biodiversity. An investment in the health of our planet is an investment in our future, one that we leave for future generations. I hope you will join me in standing for nature. Thank you.
Costs money. I keep meaning to look that shit up too.
Heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, it's now my honor to give the floor to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, to deliver a statement.
Tony, step it up a bit, Tony.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, humanity is waging war on nature, and we need to rebuild our relationship with it. More than 60% of the world's coral reefs are endangered due to overfishing, destructive practices, and climate change. Wildlife populations are plummeting because of overconsumption, population growth, and intensive agriculture. And the rate of species extinction is accelerating, with some 1 million species currently threatened or endangered, as the President just said. Deforestation, climate change, and the conversion of wilderness for human food production are destroying Earth's web of life. And we are part of that fragile web. And we need it to be healthy so we and future generations may thrive. One consequence of our imbalance with nature is the emergence of deadly diseases such as HIV/AIDS, Ebola, and now COVID-19, against which we have little or no defense. 60% of all known diseases and 75% of new infectious diseases are zoonotic, passing from animals to humans, demonstrating the intimate interconnection between the health of our planet and our home. Excellencies, biodiversity and ecosystems are essential for human progress and prosperity. They are central to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and implementing the Paris Agreement on climate change. Yet, despite repeated commitments, our efforts have not been sufficient to meet any of the global biodiversity targets set for 2020. Much greater ambition is needed, not just from governments, but from all actors in society.
But Tony, let
me be clear, degradation of nature is not purely an environmental issue. It spans economics, health, social justice, and human rights. Neglecting our precious resources can exacerbate geopolitical tensions and conflicts. Yet, too often, environmental health is overlooked or downplayed by other government sectors. This summit is an opportunity to show the world that there is another way, and transform our relationship with the natural world. By living in harmony with nature, we can avert the worst impact of climate change and recharge biodiversity for the benefit of people and the planet. Excellencies, I see three priorities for conserving and sustainably managing biodiversity. First, base solutions must be COVID-19 recovery and wider development plans. Preserving the world's biodiversity can yield the jobs and economic growth that we urgently need today. The World Economic Forum signals that emerging business opportunities across the earth could create 191 million jobs by 2030. And Africa's Great Green Wall has created 335,000 jobs. Nature-based solutions are also vital tools in our fight to solve the climate crisis. Forests, oceans, and intact ecosystems are effective carbon sinks. Healthy wetlands mitigate flood. We have natural solutions at our fingertips to protect us from natural disasters, job loss, and economic fallout. Let's use them. Second, our economic systems and financial markets must account for and invest in nature. Nature's resources still do not figure in countries' calculations of wealth. The current system is weighted towards these resources still do not figure in countries' calculations of wealth. The current system is weighted towards this. The OECD estimates the annual global funding needed for nature at between $300 and $400 billion, much less than current levels of harmful subsidies for agriculture, mining, and other destructive industries. Investing in nature will protect biodiversity and improve climate action, human health, and food security. To include biodiversity as a criterion in financial decision-making. The new task force on nature-related financial disclosures will help financial institutions to shift from finance from destructive activities and towards nature-based solutions. Third, we must secure the most ambitious policies and targets that protect biodiversity and leave no one behind. The Convention on Biological Diversity estimates that services from ecosystems make up 50 to 90% of the livelihoods of poor rural and forest dwelling. Nature offers business opportunities to poor communities, from sustainable farming to ecotourism or subsistence fishing. All of them depend on conserving biodiversity and using it sustainably. Most indigenous peoples in particular depend on healthy ecosystems that can provide the economic and financial services they need to preserve their cultures and livelihoods. Excellencies, I count on you during this summit to send strong signals of leadership to bend the curve on biodiversity loss. I welcome the leaders' pledge for nature and coalitions such as the Campaign for Nature launched at the Climate Action Summit last year. These coalitions of leaders send a strong signal to raise political ambition in the run-up to COP15 of the Convention of Biological Diversity. This includes coming to addressing the causes of biodiversity loss. I urge all leaders
this is where John Candy and George Carlin
we need to secure an ambitious post-2020 biodiversity framework, one that will help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, one that sets out concrete and measurable targets and includes means of implementation, particularly finance and monitoring mechanisms, one that mobilizes a full and effective partnership across state and societies with businesses, youth, women, indigenous peoples, and local communities. Excellencies, 10 years ago, we secured commitments that should have protected our planet. We have largely failed. But where effort has been made, the benefits to our economies, human and planetary health are irrefutable. Nature is resilient, and it can recover if we ease our relentless assault. In the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, this summit presents a unique opportunity for you all to make the decisions that will shape our shared future. We need a healthy planet for our societies to thrive and our economies to rebuild. And the world is counting on you, and I thank you.
I'm part of a sick cell because I'm sick as hell. Are you sick as well? I'm sick.
Secretary General for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Munir Akram, President of the Economic and Social Council and Permanent Representative of Pakistan, to deliver a statement.
Okay, which is he doing his job as right now? Which one is he speaking at? Damn it. This will work in a minute. We heard the Beijing hour. That was wonderfully helpful, wasn't it? How many Iranian filled, whatever, oil tankers cruising through that canal right now?
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General, Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to speak at this summit on biodiversity in my capacity as President of the Economic and Social Council. Mr. President, it was a biodiverse and hospitable planet which the emergence and evolution of the human species, providing nutrition, food, clean air, fresh water, rich oceans, natural medicines, and bountiful raw materials. It allowed humankind to survive, grow, prosper, and build great civilizations. Our great prophets and holy books prescribe not only respect for each other, but also for nature and its bounties. Unfortunately, in the modern era, we have severely
When did we start saying moderate?
nature.
Where did that come from?
In the past 50 years, the human population has doubled, the global economy has grown nearly fourfold, and global trade has grown tenfold, together driving up the demand for energy, raw materials, and much else. Many types of pollution are increasing with negative impacts for nature. 75% of the planet's land surface has been significantly altered. 66% of the ocean area is experiencing increasing cumulative impacts, and over 85% of wetlands have been lost. Approximately half the live coral cover on reefs has disappeared since the 1870s, with accelerating losses in recent decades due to climate change. The Secretary General has just said that we are at war with nature.
Fuck you.
And as he said on a previous occasion, nature is fighting back. The impact of global warming and climate change are visible, yet the impacts of biodiversity loss will be equally pervasive and equally devastating for the future of humanity. It is scientifically proven that loss of biological diversity increases the risk of zoonotic diseases. The COVID-19 pandemic is a grim reminder of the relationship between people and nature. And if the humble bee becomes extinct, agricultural production will be devastated. Once despoiled, our rivers and oceans will no longer yield their plentiful bounty. If our forests diminish further and carbon emissions are unabsorbed, masks may become a permanent feature of our existence. It is therefore tragic that none of the 20 Aichi biodiversity targets will be met by the 2020 timeline. In fact, data reveals a further regression in the fight to preserve biodiversity and ensure the sustainable use of nature.
Stop using
the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are integrated
your own vitamin C and make your own food out of the sunlight.
If the biodiversity goals are not achieved, most of the other goals will also be difficult to realize by 2030. It is high time to discard the economic models that are driving states to fight nature and each other. It is time to transition to a new economic and social paradigm which values the preservation of nature as much, if not more, than gross national product and per capita incomes, which enshrines sustainability as an integral part of the development paradigm. I hope that implementation of the Aichi targets will become an integral part of the national SDG strategies of all countries. I trust this will be fully reflected in their voluntary national reviews this year in the Economic and Social Council. We will also endeavor in ECOSOC's Development Cooperation Forum to align the UN's development system more closely with the biodiversity targets. And in the Youth Forum this year, we shall try to mobilize the energy of young people to serve their future by fighting for nature
Young nigga, I'm
rather
76
than
sickle cell years old.
Excellencies, in combating COVID-19 pandemic and the great recession it has triggered, in eradicating poverty, in installing sustainable infrastructure, finance is the key. It can be mobilized if there is political will to do so. In promoting the biodiversity goals, the central requirement is not finance. It is only political will. The will to take critical decisions to end the rape of nature and to contain the economic greed and policy negligence that are driving humanity to destroy the hospitality of our planet. Such political will can be mobilized collectively by the world's leaders. This is why this summit is timely. Indeed, it is of existential importance. I thank you.
I thank the President of the Economic and Social Council for his statement.
I need one of these with Cyrillic, damn it.
Heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, we will now hear the pre-recorded statement of the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt and the host of the 14th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, His Excellency Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Please play the video.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Volkan Bozkir, President of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly, Mr. Munir Akram, President of the Economic and Social Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to join you today in this summit that coincides with the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, albeit in exceptional circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic and social repercussions. There is a mounting recognition of the dangers of emerging threats and their interlinkages, especially the environmental challenges and their unprecedented consequences. This is a testament to our sound vision as an international community when we set preserving nature and biodiversity as one of our international cooperation priorities. In this vein, the increasing pace of environmental degradation and biodiversity loss on planet Earth due to human intervention in our biodiversity and in nature necessitates that we move more effectively and in a coordinated manner in the face of these developments, which threaten all our countries. Such developments widen the gap between developed and developing countries and further undermine our ability to achieve sustainable development goals, especially in developing and least developed countries. All that added to the negative impacts of climate change on biodiversity. Thus, we are facing a true challenge in our relationship with nature. Thus, it would be imperative to live in harmony with nature, and this is our common goal. We have to stress that link between biodiversity and sustainable development. To implement this vision and overcome the shortcomings of global efforts to implement the Convention on biological diversity
So that was helpful. That
and its goals, goals that we've all agreed upon internationally to stop the current biodiversity degradation. The 14th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention, held in 2018 in Sharm el-Sheikh, witnessed the launch of the post-2020 biodiversity framework negotiation process.
Somebody to drop another mark.
This process aims at reaching a set of ambitious goals supported by the means and mechanisms for its implementation. To this effect, Egypt has been coordinating with all stakeholders to ensure the adoption of this new post-2020 biodiversity framework and the upcoming conference of the parties to be held in China in a fair, just, and balanced manner. Proceeding from our firm belief in the inclusiveness of all nature preservation efforts and the important role of all stakeholders, be they governments, civil society, or the private sector, Egypt launched a comprehensive initiative at the said conference to introduce biodiversity to various sectors. It aimed at harnessing the complementarities between the three Rio conventions on climate change, biodiversity, and desertification. Since then, we've worked hard with all partners to ensure the effective implementation of this initiative. We've also honored its principles domestically. We streamlined biodiversity in different fields such as natural reserves, environmental tourism, and
that's the other thing I don't think
in our development plans to ensure the preservation of all natural resources and create more job opportunities in the process. Furthermore, Egypt was keen to support Africa's efforts to enhance its biodiversity and halt nature's degradation. On the margins of the same Sharm el-Sheikh conference, we hosted a high-level African meeting that deliberated on the priorities of Africa and how to preserve and protect its diverse nature. We took into consideration the continent's ability to participate in this international effort,
tomatoes got here from Peru,
and the fact that it was subject to the availability of support through the provision of financing, technology transfer, and capacity building in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and their respective capabilities.
They just sat on a boat the whole time, followed a fucking
and the different advancement between developed and developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, the preservation of biological diversity and its bounties has a direct effect on all aspects of life.
Right at the top of the page, no fucking around.
Hence,
this is like an electrical fire.
Pay for your board this month.
Mom,
is it wet garbage or dry
can
garbage?
I discuss something with you?
What to do? He's angry. He gets up because he's told he's not supposed to sit at that particular table.
Chuck, can we call you Chuck?
He pours the coffee on the, just throws the coffee out of the mug onto the ground.
Damn, gross. You got coffee, you spilled it on the ground? You
yeah, I've worked in.
You're increasing carbon emissions.
A lot of restaurants. As a lot of people have.
All the energy that went into making that fucking coffee, and you threw it on. Did you break the mug too, you bastard?
My dad and our friends, our family, they owned stores, and I helped out. And I know what it's like when you're dealing with a lousy customer.
I'm allowed to ask that, but if you ask, it's rude and nosy.
I know how difficult it can be. You're trying to be as polite as possible, and they don't give a damn.
If I ask that, they'll give me an intersection, not an answer.
So back to the guy pouring the coffee on the ground.
Bastard! I'm steaming mad.
It was followed
Chuck
by something the lady did as she passed by Nikki. She poured the leftover coffee on her face, and yes, that's called assault. You want to pour hot coffee on someone's face? That's assault. It's no different than punching it. Sometimes worse, depending on how hot the coffee is.
$2.2 million.
So this guy's wife
spilling it on yourself in a drive-through. That happened. That was
poured
the
the
90s.
coffee on her
that
face
rung in the 90s.
and said something like,
Rodney King, O.J. Simpson, and
you.
Operation
And then
Desert Storm.
Chinese.
And the tire fire. We had a tire fire.
So,
all that just brought it in the 90s.
An F-bomb, an anti-Asian bomb.
Baywatch.
Nikki is seen on the tape grabbing the woman. They then argue before going outside, and Nikki turns on her phone to record what's happening.
What is this shit?
As they get in their car, the man, this is the woman who poured the coffee on Nikki. This is her husband who also threw coffee to the ground.
Dude,
the man says to Nikki, leave it be, and then explains that his wife is, quote, not well. And then he can be heard because the phone is being turned on. Nikki's smartphone is on. And you can hear as he gets in the car saying the words effing. I'll just say effing. Everyone knows the word. I don't have to say it on the radio. He gets into the car muttering, effing Chinese. Richmond RCMP say they arrested the 74-year-old woman who was later released on a promise to appear. So no charges have been laid yet.
No, promise to appear. You're going to court.
Corporal Henderson with the Richmond RCMP says we've seen a number of racial incidents reported to us recently. We want to make it clear that hate has no place in Richmond.
That's how it's supposed to work, but we're just
and Richmond RCMP will give every allegation of these full investigation with proper oversight.
What? Damn it.
The quote from the officer, Richmond RCMP is taking an aggressive stand against racism in our community. Quite frankly, we have no tolerance for it. I should add, for people who don't live in British Columbia, you might not know that Richmond is home to many Chinese families. It is one of the most densely populated in Canada among those people.
Did you just minimize the percentage number of
Chinese Canadian?
These hate attacks, Bob, Sean,
and
whatever.
That has been a boon for Richmond. It has been a huge plus for the Richmond economy over the years.
Well, everything that runs on the railroads.
Of course, for those people who are bigoted and hostile to Chinese Canadians, they may not feel the same way.
Ownership tax.
Not that I care about their feelings, to be brutally honest with you.
I'm calling you Bill. I feel like I'm paying debts when
Nikki was quoted in a conversation with Global News as saying, I want to bring awareness to alert people. Be careful these days. You never know who's going to do whatever to you. And she's saying that in a general way, but she's talking specifically to Asian Canadians.
Is this the police that said this?
And I want to give her the last word, Nikki.
Who's Nikki?
Managing this restaurant, this coffee shop in Richmond, BC, says, I really want to say,
do you know Helen from Toronto?
Be nice to each other.
Runs a coffee shop?
It's a tough time right now.
Oh,
please.
But I'm racist for pointing out that people say shit like that. You think it. You think it.
We're going to move on from this, but I have no doubt that we'll come back to this topic from time to time. I do want to thank you again before we go to the break for what you did for all of us yesterday when we asked the question, do you believe in equality? Do you believe that we're all the same? As it was put so well
by a radioactive spider and grow up with a mutant rat that teaches us
Asian American veteran who wanted to show everyone his patriotic battle scars,
impressionist art, whatever it's called.
In the action he took in World War II. In a moment, we go back to the pandemic, and this is Charles Adler tonight.
Oh no, I chipped my diamond.
Spence will replace it.
Oh no, I cracked my diamond.
Spence will replace it.
Oh no, I lost my diamond.
Spence Diamonds will replace it every time. If you lose, chip, or crack your Spence Diamond from its original setting, we'll replace it at no extra charge.
Okay, when's the fast-talking lawyer coming in?
No fast-talking lawyer. As long as you bring in your ring for annual inspections, we've got you covered, guaranteed for a lifetime.
That's a long time.
Lifetimes usually are. Spence Diamonds, Lyman, Vaughn, Scarborough, and Mississauga. See you in store for full details.
I should have turned the sound off. That was a good one. That was powerful. Snap.
Down as rain and hit on earth.
Together we make mud. Sweet, beautiful mud.
Some find us challenging.
While all those Subarus with symmetrical full-time all-wheel drive revel in our creation.
Fuck, they just want to go fast. They don't care what's under the wheels.
Converge to form a river. To enhance biodiversity conservation requires sustained efforts by all parties. I want to welcome you to Kunming, the beautiful spring city next year, to discuss and draw up plans for protecting global biodiversity and building a beautiful world with concerted efforts.
I thank the President of the People's Republic of China for his statement. The Secretary General must leave for a previous commitment, but I thank him for his attendance this morning.
Several times. I need a GoPro right here. With the satellite uplink.
Discover how owning physical gold and silver could protect your financial future and cost your pocket less. Go to guildhallwealth.com, where it
not cost me less, cost my pocket less. I can't fucking reload this out of my fucking face.
Trying to get up out the streets and they took my boy from me. I'm out here lonely on the block cause my homies on lock. This ain't how it's supposed to be. I've been acting all day, trying to find a way to get up out of this. I know that shit don't last long. Either I be dead and gone or them cuffs are on my wrist. And I'm just here trying to leave, trying to get up out the streets and they took my boy from me. I'm out here lonely on the block cause my homies on lock. This ain't how it's supposed to be. I've been trapping all day, trapping all day, trapping all goddamn day, man. I'm just trapping all day, trapping all day, trapping all goddamn day, man. I'm just trapping all day, trapping all day, trapping all goddamn day, man. I'm just trapping all day, fucking trapping all day, trapping all goddamn day.
Clap back, we're more peaceful life, we got to clap back. We're more rasa at, we got to clap back. We're more natives at, we got to clap back, clap back. Freedom's all I wanted, but I couldn't afford it. My baby's got the spirit, she's brilliant and gorgeous. Oh yes, self-defense endorsement. Always a quiet when she about to load it, hold it. It's some more about to load it, oh shit. And the whole party is supported. Like, go ahead, tradicional, mija, come on now, go ahead, go ahead. Clap back, give them a standing ovation. Gotta tear the shit down to rebuild all of our nations. We do it on the track, we could do it on the record. Got killers on the team, we could take all of the pressure. Óyeme aquí, escúchame ahora. Esto va aquí, esto mi mano de obra. Cuando tomas de la tierra, siempre se cobra. Cuando tomas de mi gente, siempre se cobra. Aquí no se presta y aquí no se regala. Cada vez que nos robas, la deuda se paga. Cada vez que nos robas, la deuda se paga. Cada vez conmoves. Clap back, we're more people like we got to clap back. We're more rasa at, we got to clap back. We're more natives at, we got to clap back, clap back. Clap back.
heard about me, word of mouth, bringing heat from the south. Cause I got up and got out, somehow I did it without no role models. I had no one to follow, only got my shit together when I put down the bottle. And all my people with it, protecting the spirit, strength in the struggle now. Holler if you feel it, said holler if you feel it.
Sandals made out of old car tires, that's what I need.
With my people, we got to clap back. With my rasta, we got to clap back. With my natives, we got to clap back, clap back.
I didn't have Sawzallers, so I don't have to do this. I'll put studs in them for the winter. I'll be wearing sandals and socks with studs in the winter. These are not shorts, they have pants rolled up.
After that.
Cutting heads off. You worried if you cut from the same cloth. You was playing Game Boy, niggas was playing King Gods. Niggas melly rock on your block with a chain on. Just to get hit up, can't make it. Like Trayvon, just stay calm. Niggas got gay on. The stove top, metal like crayons. Turning them heat rays on. They paid on. That's some precious more. But they only wanted 2 ounces for purchase for. You know we only wanted new houses that's on the shore. But my lawyer gotta study evidence in the court. 2-door sport in the court, playing these greasy loops. After every time I shoot, that ski mask turn to a toque. Still running that nation of domination for Rook. P89 in that barrel slide is too cute. Hit up in the dome when he tried ducking. Still better than just standing there and trying nothing. Kill them little pups, I'm a G-dog. I have him in the streets playing leapfrog. American muscle over a Tesla. Pulling up the bulldog is burnt like a Presla. Let me tell you how I feel. You niggas ain't real. That shot ate your food like a meal. Let me tell you how I feel. You niggas ain't real. That shot ate your food like a meal.
Hold on, let me get some pimpin'. Fuck you think you do it. I pull up in a Buick, blast this music. You know how we do it. Yeah. Like Montel Jordan and these Jordans. All these bitches is swarming. And still I ignore them. Yeah. Cause all these girls boring. Yeah. Anytime I come through, making girls get a bullshit. It's Charlie, you know me. Rolling in a Harley with Shorty.
I just hope you got the 40. 20 niggas in dark clothing, that's what we lord. Yeah. You should hear the arrogant names these niggas were calling. Yeah. And that bitch was on call. Before Asian or Dream, we had a
oh, dude. And then we go again with why I don't try to what is the issue now. Why is this? Not much more I get done if I wasn't fucking out there.
Fucking Friday night, where the fuck is everybody? I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. Fucking Friday night, where the fuck is everybody? I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. Fucking Friday night, where the fuck is everybody? I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. Where you at? Hit me up, where the money, where the stand? Get this paper, get this cash. No, we here. With my niggas in the trash, put it in, flip it quick, get it back. Add me up, with my niggas in the room, cleaning up, sweeping up with a broom. Run it down, run it down, run it down. Double cup, double cup, double cup. So I got a couple racks today. Didn't think I'd make it, but I made it back today. Cashing out, got the bag every day. Put in work, get paid. Where my niggas at? Fucking Friday night, where the fuck is everybody? I just wanna party, like I won the lottery.
Fucking Friday night, where the fuck is everybody? I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. Fucking Friday night, where the fuck is everybody? I just wanna party, like I won the lottery. Just got off the plane, juice all in my veins, 6 bucks in my name, no one out these flames. Fucking Friday night, I ain't playing no games. I'm that West End chick that was raised in the lane.
I hope you have your offering.
Yeah.
I hope you have your offerings close, bundled tight,
yes,
and in plain sight.
Pretty much.
As I tell you about the night when all the wooden Indians came to life.
Hey, that's me. I'll have to.
It was a night filled with mystery and the reliving of histories. It took centuries for this to be. My grandchild told this to me. They say the spirit responsible was hidden inside a jade dagger or knife on that night when all the wooden Indians came to life. Their eyes opened and they could see the future and the past of thee. Could feel their blood move so free as they loosened their feet from their ancestry. The war cry screamed shrill, still filled with ancestral strife on that night when all the wooden Indians came to life. The windows of cigar stores smashing in the distance, howls in the darkness, a steady growing resistance. For some there would be fright and red on a knife on that night when all the wooden Indians came to life. The war clubs were dancing, the totems were chanting, the spirits romancing, ancestors advancing. War songs echoed at height in hearts of obsidian and ice on that night when all the wooden Indians came to life. Tomahawks and arrows flying, treaties, truces, and old peace dying. There was lightning in the sky and stars aligning, fire in the eyes and hearts designing. The cold marches on right, no reconciliation in sight on that night when all the wooden Indians came to life. Arrows rained from the heavens. This was to be generation 7. There was no patience for their heaven, no reparations, so no conflict leavened. Behind the clouds, the moon shone bright and white on that night when all the wooded Indians came to life. And on the rumble of the train, they advanced in the rain and gave thanks to the pain and offerings to the slain. They moved so slight, no one can even feel fright on that night when all the wooden Indians came to life. The souls in the canyon graveyards hollered as the war parties moved towards holy men collared. It might not have been right, but believe me, there was little fight on that night when all the wooden Indians came to life. Could see their eyes in the shadows and feel their pains from the gallows, hear the screams from the battles ringing through the misty hollows. They say it was a sight that would haunt you in daylight on that night when all the wooded Indians came to life. The birds above circled, their eyes flashing thunder as the wooden Indians danced in a fervent circular wonder. And in a might, all the souls of ancestors would ignite on that night when all the wooded Indians came to life. The trees sent their blessings from the darkness caressing. For these priests, no confessing the red blood they're redressing. There was plight filled with bright red water over rights on that night when all the wooded Indians came to life. And when the darkness subsided, a silence resided. The land grew quiet, but the birds were delighted. It all was normal and nice. Next morning at light, after that night when all the wooden Indians came to life. And it had built up for centuries. And this is just what's been sent to me. What is was meant to be, and what will is what's destiny. And I hope you have your offerings closed, bundled tight, and in plain sight on that night when all the wooden Indians come to life.
The Native American women alone go missing every year. not to mention the countless Native American murders of children and men, undocumented. At least society knows that you exist. This is our land, yet we are erased from history. Yet
I need to set a show.
Yes, nigga. Word thing. What up, nigga? Free Slim. We out here. Don't get close, nigga. We the Caribbean got the shooters behind me. She's the white lights, she's the 990. So don't sleep, no, nigga. We are what? Won't matter who it is, bound to get the job done. We the Caribbeans got the shooters behind me. She's the white lights, she's the 990. So don't sleep, nigga. We are what? Don't matter who it is, bound to get the job done. On the same shit, running with the same clip. Never gonna change, no, nigga. Only change homes and the pool, but only if it's fucking bucket up. Place I'm aiming, niggas above the water. I'm hard in the paint, no patch of fucking up. 3 pack of flip that to get our shit up. Only other hot shit is a stick up. Never a 9 to 5, cause I ain't got no day job. From the slums, little homie, when we play hard. You don't wanna see the 30-30 when it sprays off. 22 for walk around 3 the 40 to lay them down and max for the DC. Heard niggas saying, but they wanna make tracks with us. Before that, didn't even crack to us. Going hard in the booth, this a takeover. And the brown into your face, that's a makeover. 2 and 5 for a Q. The rest profit. Hustlers, I say, won't sleep till I knock it. And don't push me, cause I ain't in the talking. 12-year-old flu, so I ain't scared if you got it. Y'all got it. Is it me you comparing to? I ain't finished my fair share yet, but I hear them just started. And I ain't talking about no jump shot, brush them off, go top. You know the cold hurt my chest. Didn't think I was capable. 4-5 pipe on my heart. Traceable. Didn't think I was capable. 4-5 pipe on my heart. It isn't traceable.
You niggas don't ride something like a flat tire. There's a fire at your back, it was a backfire. Cause I got the same size as a blow dryer. Never true in your raps, just some damn liars. A great job, make them spit through the wire. And you don't supply shit, you a buyer. I'm the king of gang rap, call me sire. That's hate, for privately you rate and admire. Your rubber grip tight, no pliers. I gotta take you out, probably quit, so retire. The 4th room down, 5th lift them up. Bells don't leave shouts, so I'm switching up. Something like a bus driver still picking up. Got your hands in your pocket, nigga, stick them out. Palmer projects, money's no objects. So we finger fuck max and we contact. Slide in, slide out, duck when we ride out. Down, yo, I buck round as you dumb clowns. You're standing up till I tell them sit down. Stomach on the ground, hands behind your back, and your back. When I'm digging in your pants, give me that in your grip. All for the rest. He said, tap the weed, leave the cash. What? I'ma do him dirty, Mad Max. Do it, niggas get back. Bitches get snapped and get smacked face down when I'm breaking her back. Yo, we got metal like a rap, made a name in rap. I ain't setting it for track, never. Yo, I'ma need me a bag of that C-O-L-T. Carved in my rack, still unstolen. Stereo scratch on my actions. Stop the madness, I'm reeling up, get it gone. Magic, I don't sleep like I don't got a night show. Never in class, didn't see prom. Now I run about them close. I ain't doing wrong, but I'm clear blood strong till it drops on my palm. And it's highly dangerous and no to me arms are dangerous. Sicker than stars, I ain't saying this, but I'm a hot star. I'll snap, crack, pop like camera. I'll snap, run, duck, just hide when I let up. Run, man in the mask, man in the act, man with the strap to your man's vision black. With the phone dog and hot snap, bitches for YG, scroll clap, we clap. Do you come and try me? 70s and 90s, been moving grimy. Blood rush till it's hooked up to the ivy.
4 or 5 will stretch up, or anything is drunk. Until they end up on a stretcher, better get a coffin. Yo, Caribbeans,
So we ain't in a no long talking. Money overflow, back on my bullshit. These punks that I grew with, acting like they're too sick, too no cash making me ever switch sides. Or battle to the J, someone's get my punch fried, huh? My mind's fried. See, I don't give a fuck, stack it with a YG. Guaranteed we hit them up. Take a nigga slut, man, you know me. Never look back since my first pack in old dreams pack, nigga. Plus I get busy with these OGs screaming outside, outside. All the police fucked up when I nipped 1.5 beat. Snakes and then cop chops. Now you owe me 10 G's. Till I go to sleep. Kill you for the ABK, the marksman. Shoot for fun. What the fuck's a murder one? Bad news if you run into the DBS. All I do is give one nod, then he breathes the tech. Then he breathes the tech. All I do is give one nod, then he breathes the tech. We the Canadians are the shooters behind me. At home, he's the wide, necessities the 990. So don't sleep, no, nigga, we all one. Won't matter who it is, bound to get the job done. We the Canadians got the shooters behind me. At home, he's the wide, necessities the 990. So don't sleep, nigga, we all one. No matter who it is, bound to get the job done.
Anytime, call 1-855-55-DR-LOU or pinpointhealth.ca.
I'm so over this. I don't even know anyone who's had COVID-19. And it's not like I'm at risk. We don't see many people, just a few neighbors and close friends. It's fine. We wear a mask and everything. Really careful.
Excuses won't stop the spread of the deadly COVID-19 virus. Until we all get the vaccine, stay home as much as possible. Visit ontario.ca/COVID-19 for more information. Paid for by the Government of Ontario.
Everyone deserves to have a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. Got it for the low, got it for the low. Impact is visible on now. What you really know, I got on the flow. Homeless like you. Come out the boat, come out the boat. Cars, new come out the boat, come out the boat. Cars can continue their fight against fishy and food insecurity. Donate a car, change a life. A single donation can provide shelter for at least 10 nights
like
or 150 bag meals. Make a difference today and go to homelesscars.ca.
In 200 meters, go left onto James Street. Yeah, no wait left, I think. Recalculating. Hey, wow, I love you, man. Just wanted you to know that. Okay, recalculating. Go left onto King Street. Wait, sorry, that's a stop sign. Recalculating.
You wouldn't trust AI for directions if it were under the influence. So why would you trust yourself to drive? Don't drink and drive. A message from Global News Radio 640 Toronto.
Summit. For my part, through my Sustainable Markets Initiative and the Great Reset, I'm working with...
Delivering a stark message. The variants have won. This is a different pandemic. This is what I posted on social media this morning, and made me highly motivated to get Dr. Warner on our air to answer some questions. Dr. Warner, do you think that most people in Ontario, especially those people who are most likely to contract COVID, the ones who were mentioning earlier who work in very, very close quarters in factories, where, as you say, they don't generally get access to TV and radio platforms, but they're the ones who are not on the front lines medically, but they're on the front lines in terms of spreading and super spreading. Do you think they understand that this is a new pandemic?
I mean, I don't pretend to know what it's like to do those jobs or to have that type of life, because that's, I'm much more fortunate. But I think it's incumbent on a civil society, in Canada, where we tend to, the social safety net, we tend to protect each other to make sure that we lift up the people who are not necessarily the least fortunate, but the ones that we all rely on to put food on our table, to deliver things to our houses, and bring meals to our doors when we order them through our smartphones. I mean, that's just what we should be doing. That's the right thing to do. What I haven't heard from the provincial government in Ontario, keep in mind that I have no political affiliation. I just want things done right. I haven't heard anything about, protecting those individuals.
Why is
paid
Pizza
sick leave,
Pizza import their
paid
tomatoes?
vaccination time, enforcing employer rules
Same
so
damn
that
tomatoes we grow
the
here.
workers aren't forced to go to work just because the outbreak wasn't on their shift. I mean, that's not right. And until we do those things, we're not going to, get to the end of wave 3 very quickly, because we don't have enough vaccines to short circuit this wave 3. We have a couple more months or longer of hard work, real public health restrictions. But, shutting everything down is not good enough, and it hurts everybody. But that hurt can be less if we protect the people who are most likely to get COVID. In Ontario, one thing we should be doing is reallocating this limited vaccine supply from those areas with less COVID and where people do have the ability to minimize their exposure risk to the areas with more COVID where people can't minimize their exposure risk. To me, it just makes sense. You want the highest return on investment for each shot you have, and that means they need to go in the correct arms.
So let me just ask, to me, a really basic question here. I use Amazon Warehouse because I think that I ask myself, what would have to be shut down forcibly for people to freak out? And because so many people want and need Amazon
prostitution
right now, and the products that Amazon delivers. So I'm using that as an example. You don't have to shut down the warehouse. I'm not calling for the shut down the warehouse, but how difficult could it be to send people, medical people with vaccines, into places like the Amazon warehouse? So instead of waiting for those folks to come to them, which is not likely to happen for all sorts of reasons that you've outlined, what's wrong with the idea of taking the vaccine to them, to the workers?
There's nothing wrong with that, and that's why, we follow each other on social media. I've said that we need to pivot. The vaccine distribution strategy in Ontario was created at a time when we were pre-wave 2, where wave 3 wasn't even considered.
John Candy's playing Rob Ford in an alternate future.
But we have to recognize that the situation has changed, the game has changed,
everybody else.
And we do need to bring the water to where the fire is. I mean, that is really, really important. We, of course, can't force people to be vaccinated, but we need to make sure the people anyone who is vulnerable gets educated in their language by people they trust about these vaccines,
in this province
have an office in a way that's convenient for them so that they can be protected, so that when they go home, they're not infecting their entire families in the apartment building that has thousands of people, in the units where 8 people are sharing one washroom, in the elevators where hundreds of people go up and down every day. I mean, you can see how this can get out of control very quickly, and not of any fault of the people who are getting exposed, just by the nature of the circumstances they find themselves in.
But Dr. Werner, you used an excellent example. Fire. Nobody expects the building to get on wheels and travel to the fire department. The fire trucks have to go to the building. It's the same. We've got to go to these folks with the vaccines.
I should use that one because it is a good analogy, and I think to your listeners it probably seems obvious, but vaccine deployment and delivery, there's politics involved too, and that would mean, in Ontario we have green, yellow, orange, red, and gray zones. Green are the ones that are the most open. Gray are the most locked down. And that's supposed to parallel the amount of COVID activity in those areas. Why we would be vaccinating the green zones at the same rate as we're vaccinating the gray zones is nonsensical. They're green for a reason, because the circumstances of that part of the province mean there's less COVID activity and people can protect themselves by limiting their exposure risk. In Toronto and Peel region, which is just northwest of Toronto, those aren't the circumstances, because people are living on top of each other, and we have millions and millions of people. So you bring the water to where the fire is, absolutely.
So why don't people like you, who actually are on the front lines, your medical people, you see the patients and you see how the patients are getting younger and younger and younger, why don't people like you have more influence on these bureaucratic decisions, these government decisions? I'm just trying to grapple with why that would be a problem.
Well, there's a reason why I've done about 600 media appearances in the past year. It's because I'm trying to exert my influence from the outside, because there's lots of smart people in Ontario, but very few of them are on the inside. The Premier says he gets his advice from the Chief Medical Officer of Health. And his advisors who are not named, and their advice is not made public. That advice is provided to the cabinet and the premier, and decisions are made by them. I mean, they're the politicians. They're accountable for them, and they have to weigh things other than health when they make their decisions, and that's fine. But if they deviate from the public health recommendations, whatever those might be, I think the public is entitled to know. And that lack of transparency really gets under my skin. And, history has repeated itself now for a third time with wave 3. I think that, the time has come for the politicians to acknowledge that this isn't about politics, this is about health and getting the best minds at the table. I see doctors who really canary in the coal mine. I mean, I see who I'm intubating. I see the color of their skin, the neighborhood they come from, the language they speak, and the job they have. And all of those are dissimilar from my life. Okay, I'm a white man, well-to-do, who's a physician, who's born in Canada. And people in my neighborhood aren't getting nailed by this, but people in the neighborhoods that I service as a physician are. And I think that
Dr. Michael Warner, I'm going to have to stop it right there.
Damn it,
But
you were
clearly,
saying something.
This conversation will continue. Thank you very much for speaking out.
You're
And
talking
thank you
about
for what
race.
you're
We
doing
can't allow
for
that on
Canadian
this
patients
stage.
during this pandemic. Appreciate your time very much.
The virus is one race.
Dr. Michael Warner, who is speaking out, we need more people to do the same. He's on the front lines. Something related to what we're talking about right now as the conversation continues here in moments on Charles Adler tonight.
I had some car repairs to do, but I could only pay for half of them. Brokers Lamina at 1-800-NEW-CREDIT made the difference between stressed out driving and a smooth ride to work.
Mark went the extra mile on his repairs with a loan from Brokers Lamina at 1-800-NEW-CREDIT. It's easy to apply over the phone or online at lamina.ca. Get approved instantly.
Highness, the Prince of Wales, for his statement. We will now hear a pre-recorded statement from Ms. Archana Soren, Indigenous Youth Representative from the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow youth activists following us online, dear friends, Johar. My name is Archana Soren. I belong to Kharia tribe, an indigenous community from India. I'm one of the 7 members of the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. I would like to thank the President of General Assembly for his kind invitation to address the Summit on Biodiversity. As the sole youth representative addressing this event directly, I take this opportunity to call on the decision makers to see my appeal as a collective call of my generation who are witnessing unprecedented biodiversity crisis. I have 3 simple messages. First, nurture the indigenous practices and empower local communities as main stakeholders within decision-making structures for biodiversity conservation, taking into consideration free, prior, and informed consent. For centuries, being responsible stewards of biodiversity, we have confronted environmentally destructive projects pursued by states and corporations. Though we are protecting, yet our rights are being violated in the name of biodiversity conservation. We will be able to continue to protect biodiversity only when we feel secure, for which it is important to respect, recognize, and enforce our rights over our land and forests. Second, we need to revisit our ambitions and approach to conservation and protected areas. Doubling protected areas to cover 30% of the globe, as some want to see in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, will lead to immense human rights violations. It could constitute the biggest land grab of the world history, reducing millions of people to landless poverty, all in the name of conservation. Removing us from our land in order to protect nature is deeply colonial and environmentally damaging. We should be the leaders of conservation, not victims of it. My third and the last message to the world leaders is that we youth are your biggest allies to protect the future of our planet and preserve biodiversity. We are and will be facing the impact of biodiversity crisis. Despite this, we remain marginalized, unrecognized, and underrepresented in decision-making spaces. More proactive steps are the way forward to ensure intersectional and intergenerational equity. We are tired of your countless environmental pledges, agreements, and failed commitments. All we want to say is that we are ready to work with you to reverse the biodiversity loss. The question is,
shipping containers
are
full of
you
5-gallon buckets of concrete blocks and shovels and gravel, some type of gravel.
I thank the indigenous youth representative for her statement.
Youth, the blood clots, youth, the blood clots.
Heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, we will now begin the plenary segment of the summit. Before calling on the first speaker on the list, may I remind delegations that the statements are limited to 3 minutes for national statements and 5 minutes for those speaking on behalf of a group of states. I commend all delegations for the overwhelming interest in participating in this first UN Summit on Biodiversity at the heads of state and government level. It is clear indication of the importance attached to this moment in the run-up to COP15 in Kunming, China, and towards a post-2020 global biodiversity.
Plentiful. And we think that's related to change in forest structure and composition, and some of those changes result in more bear food.
Stenhouse says the forest is changing because of logging, which he calls a double-edged sword. Not all species benefit from a younger forest, and more activity in the bush creates more roads, which isn't good for wildlife. And the Canadian economy has been on a roll, climbing for 9 months in a row. Statistics Canada stating today the GDP in January grew 0.7%, beating expectations. Now consumer confidence is reaching new heights, and the Conference Board of Canada predicts this week there are big things in store for 2021. So could we see a roaring 20s style comeback? Global's Ann Gaviola is looking into it.
The Roaring 20s swept across America after the deadly 1918 flu pandemic. The similarities between then and now are striking. Technological advances were drastically changing people's lives. The stock market was soaring, and people were ready to cut loose and spend money.
I'm going to try and say yes more.
Brianna Davies has big plans for when things get back to some semblance of normal.
Having so many of the things we take for granted every day gone, like the ability to go grab a glass of wine with a girlfriend at a new little spot.
The Roaring 20s style comeback is dependent on several moving targets, including the pace of the vaccine rollout, the impact of new financial aid from Ottawa, and consequences of the more contagious coronavirus variants. In sports, the Toronto Maple Leafs were the better of the top two teams in the NHL's North Division tonight, beating the Winnipeg Jets 3-1. The other Canadian game scheduled for this evening between the Vancouver Canucks and Calgary Flames was postponed due to COVID-19 protocols after 2 players and a coach for the Canucks were moved on to the league's COVID list. And at the Miami Open, Canadian Bianca Andreescu is on to the semifinals after downing Spain's Sara Sorribes Tormo in 3 sets. From the Global News Desk, I'm Skylar Peters.
First, they wanted to know if you get cracked, then it was AIDS.
Common sense.
It was
Canadian. This is Charles Adler tonight.
Here is Charles Adler.
Charles Adler's another great night for some Canadian common sense. Great night for a little bit of Chuck and Jody. We'll bring Jody Vance on in just a few moments. Everyone knows I'm a huge admirer of her talent. Whether she's discussing sports or news, it doesn't matter to me. She was, I guess, the country's very, very first major female national sports anchor on Sportsnet a number of years ago. She does wonderful work for online publications like The Orchid, and she's also a star on CKNW, the 50,000-watt low-torch flagship of this global news network, and occasionally when she finds some time to do it, she hosts the show, and I'm extremely grateful for that. Monday's circuit breaker press conference, writes Jody Vance, and we'll talk about what a circuit breaker press conference is in a moment, sparked a rather visceral memory. And so, because of what happened at that press conference and what a certain premier said, in this case British Columbia's John Horgan, Jody Vance was motivated to share her story. And her story is based in British Columbia, but it's not unlike stories across the country where young people, despite everything that is thrown at them, okay, are doing jobs, in some cases 2 and 3 different minimum wage part-time jobs, in many cases in the service industry, where they face all sorts of pushback and blowback and rudeness. And everyone who has worked in services listening to this knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so she felt that something was said at this particular news conference by this particular premier, which kind of missed out on the central point that many of these young workers are experiencing in their lives, and that's called hunger.
Oh, what?
I'm not suggesting it's the kind of hunger that you see in those ads where we're invited to assist babies in parts of the world where hunger is a 24/7 reality. But I'm talking about people who are not bathed in luxury. People who live in small, cramped apartments with not exactly wonderful furniture and do not have a wonderful disposable income, are living paycheck to paycheck, and yes, are working harder than many of the people who are condescending to them and looking down on them. And having said all of that, let me do some Chuck and Jody here and bring on Jody Vance. Jody, welcome back to the microphone.
Open up a McDonald's and pay my employees entirely with McDonald's food.
Good. Can you get closer to your microphone so that I can hear you better?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
No, you sound way off mic. So I'll just ask our own technical producer if there's something that we can do about that. Maybe bring you on a different beat, because I don't want it to sound like you're talking at the back of the cave. One of your great
she's probably
assets in terms of broadcasting is a really good delivery. And so I want to give people a full measure of what Jody Vance has to offer. First of all, what is a circuit breaker press conference, Jody Vance?
Tell us how it works in this foreign nation of British Columbia.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to call Jody back and get her back on the air in just a few moments. Let me just give you an excerpt of what Jody wrote in the Orca. It was 1980 something, and having flown the family coupe shortly after graduation, it was time to spread my wings, my first foray into adulting, free to live and learn, and I had a blast doing both. Freedom to make my own choices and forced to count pennies, which existed back then, by the way, while gaining a fresh circle of friends who would become like family. Our crew's biggest stress inducer was navigating our way into the neighborhood hotspot each night, no earlier than 11 p.m., to dance and play pool and drink a bit too much. So, Jody Vance, I mean, it sounds to me like you were having a party, and I know that's not the case that you're trying to make, that life was wonderful, because you were very, very hardworking. Of course, you partied after you did your 2 minimum wage jobs. But let's get back to basics here. What was this so-called circuit breaker press conference? What is that? And what is it specifically that the Premier of BC's John Horgan said that motivated you to write this piece for the Orca?
Well, Charles, it was watching the press conferences, we always do, most of us anyway. So many British Columbians and Canadians, for that matter, are tuning in nonstop daily to get new case numbers, tragic passing of people to this horrible virus, and we're all tuned in, and now we're into this third wave that most of us were taken aback by. We thought we were navigating through the second wave and the light at the end of the tunnel, and everybody's pulling in the same direction. And then these variants of concern, which you've been talking about, vaccines variants. And then all of a sudden, after last week here in BC, the public health officials, Dr. Bonnie Henry, along with Health Minister Adrian Dick, loosened things up a little bit. We had some positive vibes going as opposed to more positive. And then a rather swiftly planned press conference for Monday that included Premier John Horgan as well as our provincial health officer and health minister. Where Premier Horgan, he was Premier Dad. I hear a lot of our CKNW political journalists sort of referencing him this way, because he's famous for the dad jokes, and he's kind of like that guy. But for whatever reason, Premier Horgan decided to really bring the hammer down on young people. And specifically, he was like, people from the ages of 20 to 39 are blowing it for the rest of us. And I was like, hold on a minute. Well, yes, we see a lot of people, most British Columbians are doing the right things, but a lot of people have loosened up, and it is frustrating for those of us who are in serious lockdown. But boy, it made me think, Charles, about, when I was in, and what would happen to me if I had to go a year without a job in the restaurant or bar industry, which both of those industries in BC have been shut down for indoor service, which is not something we've seen since last spring, where there was a brief period of time here in British Columbia where that was the case. So I just thought about all of the young people that are living literally paycheck to paycheck, have dealt with this for more than a year, being not just told that they can't do their job, but also, way to go, you're ruining it for everyone else. And I just thought, that just feels unfair. I need to talk about what it's like to really be walking that financial fine line as a young person, trying really, really hard. So I decided to just tell my story and not be judgmental about government. I don't know the inner workings of the Premier's office or what the provincial health officer knows or does or doesn't know. But I just felt like it was unfair. So I just thought I'd tell that story and sort of let the young people of BC, and older people for that matter, that are working paycheck to paycheck and need the work, that I hear them and I see them, and I don't blame them.
Jody, what is it that, because as we know, it doesn't matter whether it's provincial or federal, all of these different the politicians have lots of people working in communications, what we just call the comms people, and every day the comms people have a message of the day. And so generally the messages are crafted according to what they think the public is perceiving. So to the comms people, in this case, in the provincial government of British Columbia, do they perceive that there are enough videos out there on social media showing people in their 20s and 30s partying and therefore super spreading and therefore giving the public the impression that they are, to use the Premier's words, blowing it for the rest of us? Is that what this latest message that bothered you, is that what this latest message is based on?
I can't pretend to know what is happening, as I said, inside the Premier's office or in his head. He has walked it back a little bit in the days since the press conference. It was a very, I think, unscripted and off-the-cuff moment for Premier John Horgan. But for me, it was less about what he said and more about the fact that there was no net in place for the people, particularly the young people, who don't have a plan B, have nowhere to go, can't move back in with their parents. Maybe their parents aren't even here. They're not allowed to travel. We're not allowed to go anywhere. Maybe they're from somewhere else, and they're stuck in a place where they can't make rent, they can't work, and maybe can't eat. And a reporter, I believe it was Richard Bushman, asked the question of, what supports are in place for these young people, and basically the Premier said, we'll get back to you on that. And I thought, wow, that you get really hungry waiting for that.
Yeah, we'll get back to you on that. Is a euphemism for we don't have any.
Go fuck yourself.
Because he is a person who's very detail oriented, and if those supports existed, he'd be happy to download them. Let's continue the conversation about people who are, yes, young and hungry, and being scapegoated for phase 3 of this particular pandemic. A little bit of Chuck and Jody here with you, Charles and Jody Vance on Charles Adler tonight.
On this ambitious goal.
No angry callers.
As per the Secretary General's Global Biodiversity Outlook 2020, none of the 20 targets were achieved in full, and only 6 were partially achieved. More than 60% of the world's coral reefs are under threat.
Did you just tell us, sir?
Land degradation has reduced productivity in 23% of the global terrestrial area. 1 million species of animals and plants
lobster trap out of bamboo.
are at risk of extinction, many within decades, which is unprecedented in human history.
Get stuck in it, probably.
If this trend continues, we face a future where between 30 to 50% of all species may be lost this century. This loss is not restricted to plants and animals. It also entails enormous risks to human prosperity and well-being.
Well, we're animals depending on
Destruction of natural environments and habitat
I thought you were including
increases the risk of people and wildlife contact, which greatly endangers public health. The recent outbreak of COVID-19 and its devastating impact
further promoted by those people who really love books. And also, I just hope that more beautiful bookstores can be opened across the city.
Be done by way of local legislation. We will specify the composition and operation of the review committee.
That was Hong Kong Executive Chief Carrie Lam briefing the press about the amendments to improve the city's electoral system. Well, the Chinese Foreign Ministry says that the affairs of Hong Kong are purely China's internal affairs. The Chinese government is determined and confident to safeguard national sovereignty, security, and prosperity and stability of Hong Kong. China will continue to implement the principles of one China, two systems and patriots administering Hong Kong. It says any attempts to meddle in Hong Kong's affairs will never succeed. Officials have been explaining the amendments. Zhang Yong, deputy head of the Commission for Legislative Affairs of the National People's Congress Standing Committee, says that they are politically, constitutionally, and legally significant. He elaborates on changes.
I remember the last time I saw Street back in the COVID.
Generally, there are 5 aspects. First is the reconstruction of the election committee. It clearly stipulates the size, composition, terms in office, and membership qualifications of the election committee, and further expand the broad representativeness of the election committee. Second is to clearly stipulate the division, quota allocation, and formation method of the 5 sectors of the election committee to make its coverage wider, and further enhance the balanced participation of all sectors of Hong Kong society. Third is the improvement and expansion of the function of the Electoral Committee, which is more conducive to improve the relationship between the executive and the legislature, and the implementation of the executive-led system. Fourth is to stipulate the election system for the Chief Executive and the Legislative Council. Among them, the original Chief Executive election system is basically retained. The nomination mechanism has been adjusted to make sure the position of Chief Executive will be held by a firm patriot. The focus is on reforming the Legislative Council election system to better balance the overall interests and boundaries of Hong Kong society. Fifth is the establishment of a candidate qualification review system to ensure patriots governing the Hong Kong SAR and resolutely exclude anti-China forces from the Hong Kong SAR government organs.
Chinese official Deng Zhonghua from the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office of the State Council has explained the purpose of the improvements to the electoral system.
The main purpose of improving the electoral system of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region is to plug the loopholes and defects in the current system. We will build a democratic system with Hong Kong characteristics that suits the city's actual conditions and meets the requirements of the principle of one country, two systems. The improvements reflect the following principles. First, the improvements will safeguard China's sovereignty, security, and development interests in accordance with the Constitution, the Basic Law, and the decisions of the National People's Congress. The right for Hong Kong residents to vote and be elected is guaranteed in accordance with the law. Second, the improvements will fully implement the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong, ensure that the governance of the city is firmly in the hands of patriots, and provide a solid institutional guarantee for the steady and sustained implementation of one country, two systems. Third, the improvements will enhance the representativeness of the election committee and the Legislative Council and will safeguard the overall and fundamental interests of Hong Kong society.
Fourth, the improvements will strengthen effective coordination between the executive and the legislature, improve the efficiency of governance, and reduce internal friction and political disputes. This will enable the Hong Kong government and people from all walks of life to focus on developing the economy, improving people's livelihood, and maintaining the city's prosperity and stability. Therefore, these amendments and improvements to the electoral system of Hong Kong will optimise and develop the democratic system of the city.
And now let's continue our special coverage on Xinjiang's cotton industry, and we go live to our very own Kate Kuei, who is in Kashgar, Xinjiang. Hi there, Kate. This is your day 3 in Xinjiang. Still no luck finding the so-called forced labor, huh?
Right, Lily. Well, now I'm actually standing in the factory, a yarn manufacturing in Xinjiang province, in Chumushuk place. This is a county in Xinjiang province, southern part of Xinjiang. Well, apparently you can see it's all automated. There is definitely no forced labor, as you just said. No luck at all for me to find a forced labor. And if we have to force anything to work, it must be machine, and it can only be machine. So definitely no luck. Well, southern Xinjiang, frankly speaking, I genuinely love this place. Well, the scenery is beautiful here. People are very nice, and also it is very, very safe. Plus, it's also culture rich. I was quite hungry last night about 10:30 while busy finishing my script. So I ordered a takeout from a platform. And you know what? A bigger gentleman delivered a Xinjiang snack to my doorstep in about 30 minutes time. So everything is convenient. It's I genuinely like this place. This is a yarn factory, but before all those threads can be made as yarn, we need cotton. And I know there are a lot of controversy on cotton, especially on social platform media these days on Xinjiang cotton. So I actually had a chat with 2 ordinary cotton farmers in the county in southern Xinjiang as well. And let's now take a look at the story that I filmed yesterday and hear their thoughts on the real situation in Xinjiang. Ugly Wu is responsible for the production of a 5,000 mu cotton field in Bachu, a county in Kashi Prefecture. Kashi is located south of the Xinjiang Autonomous Region and is one of the key cotton production areas in China. When we arrived yesterday, Ugly Wu just started sowing his 5,000 mu cotton field. I wasn't surprised to find almost no one in the field, but lines of machine-pressed track evenly distributed on vast land under the sunshine. He said he only needed 18 people to help him because most works were done by machines, which is more efficient. Apart from the initial investment, which can get credit from the bank in the long run, using machine is also less costly. During harvest time, he might need more help to collect cotton, while machines take care of most of the work. I asked him who he sell the cotton to. Ablik Mu said he usually sell most of his produce to ginning factories, who then sell to downstream purchasers. When I asked him if the U.S. sanction from last year hurt his business, he said no, it didn't have any real impact on him because his cotton has more demand than what he can supply. When I asked the question about forced labor as accused by the U.S. and Better Cotton Initiative, or BCI, Ablik Mu laughed.
We Uyghurs are living happily and freely as we can. No one is forcing us on anything.
Ablik Mu contracted many family couple employees locally, and he said, with the help from machines, one family unit can take care of 100 mu cotton field. He's also ambitious and intends to increase his productivity per mu by 20% with planting technology upgrades. As the head of local agriculture cooperation, he also needs to make sure the cotton production is conducted orderly as one of his key responsibilities. Behind me is a typical example of how modern technology being used in cotton planting industry in Xinjiang province. With that modern technology, you don't really need that much human labor. So forced labor in cotton planting in Xinjiang province is definitely a ridiculous false accusation. BCI should apologize to the cotton farmers in Xinjiang. The other smart young cotton farmer we encountered in the field was called Ali Rahman. I wasn't expecting him to be the cotton farmer because he looks young and relatively inexperienced. He told me it was mostly his parents who were working with the local agriculture cooperation, but they only take care of a 50 mu cotton field and have income from other sources. Due to the pandemic, he could not find an ideal job immediately after graduating last year, so he came to help his parents. When I asked him what he wants to do in his life, he said,
I want to pass the civil service exam and be a civil servant later.
Public Mu has built a cozy farmhouse for his mother and his family. His mother was very kind and offered us snacks and fruits when we visited his place. He told me he tried other businesses before, but chose cotton planting because he thinks it generates a steady income for his family. And while he is only 30 years old, he looks forward to achieving more in his life. Index provider FTSE Russell has given its final approval for the inclusion of Chinese sovereign bonds. They will be included in the FTSE World Government Bond Index from the end of October. They will be phasing over 3 years. Michelle Vandenberg has the story.
The inclusion of Chinese government bonds, or CGBs, in the FTSE sets the stage for billions of dollars of inflows into China. CGBs are already included in indices like JP Morgan and Bloomberg Barclays. But the FTSE inclusion is expected to have a larger effect due to the size of passive flows tracking it. HSBC estimated with roughly 2.5 trillion tracking the WGBI, some $130 billion in inflows could be expected, given China's eventual 5.25% weighting.
The inclusion of the fixed income market, especially the treasury market of China, into the world financial market actually means that all the Chinese market has been able to be connected to the global financial market, and that means the funds will flow into China, also sometimes out of China, and Chinese market is a part of the global market. That actually means a comparison of investment into fixed income stuff across countries. That if you invest in Chinese treasury, you get like 3.5%, and you invest in U.S. treasury, you get 2%. Then that will be a decision for traders to make.
Chris Woods, head of policy and governance at FTSE Russell, praised China on its reform efforts and will continue to work with the PBOC to ensure that reforms will continue to yield improvement to market structure. Pan Gongsheng, deputy governor at the People's Bank of China, welcomed the move and said that the central bank will work actively to promote the further opening of China bond market to international investors.
The yield of the Chinese treasury bond will be connected even closer to the yield of other treasuries at other countries. And that actually means a lot to China's currency, because in that case, more countries, more foreign reserve, more companies will take China's currency as a kind of reserve currency for themselves, as a trading currency, etc. So that means that the Chinese financial market will finally open to the world and be connected to the world.
Chinese government bonds are already becoming increasingly popular with global investors due to its yield and its relative insulation from movements in other bond markets. Foreign investors held a record of around $318 billion of Chinese government bonds in February. Benchmark 10-year Chinese government bonds yielded 3.209% on Monday, compared with a 1.7116% U.S. 10-year yield. Michelle Vandenberg, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, let's zoom in on the 1 Hour Forum for Asia. Officials of the forum says that this year, the forum will focus on strengthening global governance and advancing Belt and Road cooperation. Officials say that major topics will also include dual circulation, carbon neutrality, and an aging society. And also high on the agenda are COVID-19 vaccines and digital economy, both critical to Asia and the world. And this year marks the 20th anniversary of the forum, which will be held from April 18th to the 21st in South China's Hainan province. And about 2,000 representatives from different industries will attend the meeting. Li Baodong, who is the Foreign Secretary General, said that looking into the impact of COVID-19 and restoring confidence in global cooperation would be of the key importance for this event.
面对国际矛盾与纷争增多，全球性的挑战更加的突出。
In the face of increasing international contradictions and disputes, global challenges have become more prominent. All parties believe strengthening global governance is more important and urgent than ever. With production flow blocked, Belt and Road cooperation has promoted the economic recovery of Asia and adjacent regions, demonstrated the determination of Asian countries to promote international cooperation, and also provide an Asian perspective for improving global governance.
Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the global economy experienced its worst peacetime recession in 90 years. And a report from the United Nations estimates that developing countries in Asia and the Pacific registered their weakest economic performance since 1990, with an estimated 1% output contraction in 2020. Well, the countries deployed in all more than $1.8 trillion in a fiscal response to the COVID-19 crisis, and the pandemic has caused unprecedented social-economic disruptions. Working hour losses totaled the equivalent of 140 million full-time jobs last year, and the survey for this year is cautiously optimistic on the economic outlook for developing Asia-Pacific economies, and they are forecast to grow by 5.9% in 2021, thanks to improvements in pandemic control and vaccine rollouts. And that'll do for this edition of Global Business here on CQTN. Thank you for being with us. I'm Lily. Bye for now.
Been delivered by the end of this week. Giro made the comments during a virtual Liberal fundraiser tonight with Procurement Minister Anita Anand, who's in charge of securing vaccines to immunize Canadians against the novel coronavirus. And some of Georgia's most prominent corporate leaders have begun to more forcefully criticize the state's sweeping new election law.
Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian tells ABC's GMA3 that after reviewing Georgia's new voting law and speaking with leaders in the African American community, it's clear it will make it harder for Black voters to cast their ballots.
This is going to have a significant impact on their perception of their ability to gain access to the polls, and we don't support that.
The CEO of Coca-Cola also now says the law is unacceptable. Earlier, he'd called it disappointing. Both of the Georgia-based companies had faced threats of boycotts after their initial, more muted responses. Elizabeth Schulze, ABC News, Washington.
From the Global News Desk, I'm Skylar Peters.
And they've got to have the contiguous open green spaces, interconnected waterways, channels, and ponds across neighborhoods that can naturally detain and filter the water, as well as foster the urban ecosystems and boost the biodiversity and create cultural and recreational opportunities, like what you have mentioned, some of the gardens. It's very beautiful, and people can hang out over there, play in the garden. And also, you need to have some cities would have the green roofs that can retain rainwater and naturally filters it before it is recycled or released into the ground. And also, water savings and recycling is also very necessary. This kind of system have to be put into the place. And also, what are the benefits of the sponge city? You've mentioned some, like say, more clean water for the city, replenished groundwater, and also a greater accessibility to water resources for cities are all the good side of it. And this also entails greater water self-sufficiency, which allows cities to increasingly rely on water resources from within their boundaries, and also cleaner groundwater, reduction in flood risk, and lower the burdens on drainage system. Also, the benefits are, the benefits also include greener, healthier, more enjoyable urban spaces, and also enriched biodiversity. That means around the green open spaces, wetlands, urban gardens, and green rooftops, you can make the whole city more beautiful and livable, actually.
Yeah, and sometimes in the UK you often hear after some heavy rain there are some regions where there could be the flood issue, or some of the houses would find that they need to claim insurance, the flood insurance, because they found that their houses have been flooded. This has become some sort of issue with some areas in England, and I'm glad that they have learned from some other cities' experience, and now is trying to use the Sponge City project. At least that it can solve some of the problems. in the past, when I was watching the news, sometimes I was wondering, you know, the rain. Yeah, there has been some heavy rain, and then suddenly there's news coming in which shows this, you know, this area has been flooded and that area has been flooded, and sometimes you could find residents taking the journalists into places where they live and show, you know, how the flood water had made a mess of their homes.
Right.
I was always wondering, okay, so how big is how heavy, you know, what's the rain to create this kind of disaster, floods?
Right.
It could be because of the land situation. It could be because of the like the strength of the rainstorm. So all the things could create some disaster. And if sponge cities can help them solve those surface water or surface flood issue, why not? We are going to have some nicer roads, because in some old residential areas, when they pave the road with the permeable tiles, you will have a very clean streets. And there could be more green areas. Perhaps there's those thinking gardens and things like that. Why not? If it helps, why don't we just use it? Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. And on that note, let's get to a song break. And here is Zhang Xiaoli with the song.
If they need $300 billion and they're 10 times our size, do you think our government should spend $30 billion? I don't want to do that here. That's not the point of this conversation. But in broad strokes, in general, if the Americans are going to build out a network of charging stations, do you think it's just a matter of time before Canada does the same?
Yeah, I mean, Canada's, you know, doing it. We're just not doing it at the same level. I mean, I think the amount of money that the federal government has sort of allocated for charging stations thus far here is sort of in the order of hundreds of millions, not even billions. So it's a long way to go to get to you know, relatively speaking, we're not sort of on a par.
They slam on the brakes and get that energy back.
You know, I think, again, not comparing things, but I think in terms of, it's too literally comparing things. If you can look at a few areas, our federal government has put a lot of money forward on transit, electrification of buses and transit and that sort of a thing. I think if you look at the number we put up there, it's not way below what Biden's plan includes for buses and things like that. So we, you know, we are doing some stuff. I think a lot of people on this, you know, in Canada are looking at the next budget, which is coming in April, and expecting to see more in this space, for sure. I mean, clearly, you know, the Liberal government has talked about Build Back Better and Make It Green. So I don't think there's any doubt that that's where they're going. But I think it's going to come down to a question of, you know, people are going to be wanting to see more money for charging and you know, some mechanisms to stimulate vehicle sales as well.
So I'm thinking about, you know, one of the busiest parts of North America, and that would be the Greater Toronto area, which is the neighborhood that you live in. I mean, I look at all of the carbon emissions coming out of the cars and trucks and vans over there. I'm not saying that you can turn them all into EVs immediately, but how do you suspect that we can bring the carbon emissions down? Every government talks about how sensitive they are to the various treaties, Kyoto, Paris, etc., the commitment that Canada has internationally to bring emissions down. How could we possibly be serious about bringing emissions down if we don't do something about replacing fossil fuel vehicles, say in the Greater Toronto area, just focusing on your own backyard? If we don't focus on replacing at some point in the next 10 to 15 years those fossil fuel vehicles with electric vehicles, do you think it's possible to honor our commitments internationally without doing that?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know what the sort of breakdown is in, you know, Toronto area, the GTA exactly, but, you know, generally a rule of thumb is they say transportation emissions are pretty much, you know, number 2 in the country in terms of our overall sort of emissions. buildings buildings emissions are kind of 1-2 with transportation.
Oh, stuff that moves and
It's
stuff
probably
that doesn't.
given the amount of transportation driving that happens in this area, not just passenger cars either, but trucks and fleets.
Where are you driving to and
the trucks
from?
and fleet side doesn't get as much attention sort of in the public's mind, but that's really where the payoff has to be. If you think about taking a diesel truck off the road versus a car, it's the equivalent. You get a lot more bang for your buck taking a big diesel truck off the road. A lot's got to happen there, and it's got to happen pretty fast, I think. I think we're at an interesting time. There's a lot of things kind of aligning. The industry itself is going through a crazy amount of change right now. You look at all the major automakers are if you look at sort of what they're planning over the next 3 to 5 years, huge amount of increase in EVs and different models, which would again, that's another sort of been another impediment thus far, is just if you wanted to buy an SUV or a pickup truck, they're probably the two most popular, numerous vehicles on the road. They're really hard to get an electric until pretty much now, but in 3 years it's going to really change. So we're going to see some changes there. Trucking is interesting, but we're really still just sort of seeing companies kind of just dipping their toe in the water. Canadian Tire, CN, just yesterday or this week, Purolator announced, they're going to start, putting some electric delivery vans on the road. So we're seeing it happen, but it's happening in fairly small number. But I think it has to happen quickly, just to kind of, get where we need to get to. You talk about, you look at sort of, pull back a bit and look more internationally. A lot of countries are sort of setting targets for, we won't sell any more, combustion vehicles after, say, 2035 is a common date. If you say 2030, that's on the passenger side. Quebec has announced an intention to, I think it's 2035. BC has something similar. So, if you sort of think about 10, look 10 years, 15 years ahead and try to envision no more of these vehicles being sold, then it kind of gives you a sense of how quickly between now and then the rate of uptake has to increase.
Well, capital or money is the mother's milk of invention. We talk about necessity being the mother of invention, but really it's capital. And the capital around the world, whether it's coming from hedge funds or other major sources of funding, private equity funds, all of the capital is going to green fuels and to alternates. So I know that at the moment it feels like everything's working at a tortoise pace, but like so much else in our various manufacturing revolutions, things go from being very, very slow to very, very fast in a hurry. My guess is, and you can guess along with me here, Brian Banks, my guess is in 15 years from now, we'll forget about this conversation. We'll forget about the fact that we ever talked about how slow the revolution was, because 15 years from now, we're going to be almost there.
Yeah, if I save $1 every day,
so, and I hope so. I think we have to be, if you want to sort of, set it in target terms for emissions. It's not just about transportation, but that's a big piece of it. But I think in 5 years, we're gonna be having a much different conversation. Never mind 15. Volkswagen, I think, I know they're getting a bit of flack this week because of the, they sort of the April Fool's joke about their name changed to what was it, Volkswagen, Volkswagen. It's meant to kind of signify their.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but their big push in electrification. I think they plan to sell. I think a quarter of their sales they expect to be electric by 2025. That's only 4 years out. GM's got a pretty aggressive target. So I think 5 years from now, it's going to be a completely different picture. Never mind 10.
I think the fact that Tesla has so much interest talking about, capital and invention and innovation. There's so much capital chasing Tesla right now that Tesla on paper is worth more than all of these other companies, Volkswagen and General Motors and all the others combined, even though naturally if you combine all of them in terms of the output, they're producing exponentially more cars than Tesla. But nevertheless, as far as capital is concerned, Tesla has more money than all of them combined right now in terms of asset value. And I think that tells us something about where the automotive industry is going. I want to continue the conversation with you in just a few moments, Brian Banks, on the electrification of North America, not just America. Editorial director for the Electric Economy of Canada, who owns an EV, and we'll talk about some of the other issues that the people who own EVs or are thinking about owning EVs are looking at right now. Many of them, of course, are monetary, and many of them involve incentives from the government. Brian Banks with yours truly in a moment, right here. Charles Adler, tonight.
It's the Jeep No Limit sales event, where you can enjoy big discounts on the original SUV, the one that continues to define and redefine what an SUV can be. The most awarded SUV ever. Right now, enjoy up to $8,100 in discounts on select Jeep models, plus $2,500 in loyalty cash for select owners.
Damn it. Damn it.
Dramatically as a result of war fought on the territory of Poland. The preservation efforts of this extremely endangered species for the world has brought spectacular results. The Polish bison population is currently the largest globally, and many specimens are transferred by us to other countries for the purpose of restitution. In this context, I would like to stress the importance of active nature conservation, which must complement and balance passive protection forms. Preserving biodiversity is also a special task for agriculture, which constitutes an important sector of the Polish economy. It is part of the concept of sustainable development, where the efficiency and quality of production must be linked to the protection of the soil, water, and landscape. Among the strategic actions for the coming years, above and beyond the promotion of good agricultural practices and raising ecological awareness, is the preservation of valuable natural habitats, as well as the genetic resources of farm animals and plants, including traditional varieties of fruit trees. The protection of biodiversity is currently one of the biggest challenges of civilization, especially in the light of the advancing climate change. An example of this was the declaration Forests for Climate, adopted by 82 countries during the COP24 Climate Summit in Katowice. The actions we are taking today will be of fundamental significance for what will happen tomorrow, and their effects will be assessed by future generations. Therefore, let us implement them together with passion, knowledge, and diligence, guided by the common good and the desire to change for the better. Thank you for your attention.
Republic of Poland for the statement just made. I now invite the President of the Republic of Colombia to deliver a pre-recorded statement. President of the Republic of Colombia to deliver a pre-recorded statement.
The planet is in a state of emergency. The loss of biodiversity is accelerating at a speed never before known to humankind, and the pandemic made it even more patently clear that there is an inextricable link between a healthy and prosperous life and healthy ecosystems. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is an opportunity to ensure that from the very highest level we adopt measures which will allow us to achieve a vision of living in harmony with nature by the year 2050. In Colombia, we wish this framework to be effective. We wish to see the post-COVID-19 economic recovery process be green and just, and we wish to ensure that we can move forward with the achievement of the SDGs. To do that, we need to embrace 5 commitments. We need to ensure, first of all, that 30% of the land and marine area of the globe has protected status by 2030. We need to embrace sustainable patterns of production and consumption in the sectors with greatest environmental impact. Third, we must incorporate biodiversity in the planning and management of all productive sectors and at all levels of government. 4, we need to commit to nature-based solutions as cost-effective tools to preserve biodiversity. At the same time, such tools create jobs and stimulate economic growth. 5, we must leverage greater resources from all sources to protect and promote biodiversity. In Colombia, biodiversity is a strategic asset found across the nation. In our fight against deforestation, for example, we have successfully reduced between 2018 and 2019 deforestation by 20%, and we formed the Coalition for the Prohibition of Deforestation. We have planted 35 million trees of a goal of 180 million. We want to plant 180 million trees by 2050. We want to move forward with a productive model which sees us produce while we conserve and conserve while we produce. We have incentives for environmental protection, such as payments for environmental services, and such stimuluses have encouraged the preservation of biodiversity. Renewable energy also now occupies a greater share of our energy mix. Let us continue thus. We continue to promote the Leticia Pact. We have the Coalition for the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and Persons, and we work with the Regional Commission for the Circular Economy. We have the Project Columbia Heritage and Biodiversities. Now, we call upon all nations to support us in our strategic efforts to protect the tundras and the high mountain ecosystem, as well as all of the people and resources that are housed within them. Colombia invites the world to stand shoulder to shoulder in assuming its historic responsibilities. It must seize the opportunity of change we have before us and take decisive action to achieve the goal of preserving biodiversity. That is the challenge of our age. Thank you.
I thank the President of the Republic of Colombia for the statement just made. I now invite the President of the Republic of Peru to deliver a pre-recorded statement.
The pandemic put a new wrinkle in all plans regarding our activities and challenges, including our determination to draw attention to nature in such events as the one we find ourselves today. However, these circumstances do not diminish our concerns for environmental issues. Quite to the contrary, they demonstrate the interrelation with other phenomena and the certainty that global problems must be dealt with in the framework of a reinforced multilateralism. This is something that is made necessary today by such issues as human health, economic recovery, and sustainable development. The Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the report that was issued last April of 2019, recommended a greater attention to deterioration of ecosystems, climate change, pollution of land and water, and overexploitation of animals and wild plants. The pandemic has obviously heightened the need to focus even more attention on this. This is why Peru, in planning and working to achieve the well-being of our citizens, has based its efforts on healthy ecosystem.
You need to sort of charge up again before you come back. You could be going to, you could be going shopping, you could be going to work, there might be a charger there, you plug it in, you get a bit of a top up while you're doing your business and you carry on. Where it's more of a factor is if you're doing, longer distance drives. And right now, there's enough sort of charging services out there that if you're sticking to the main highways, certainly the Trans-Canada Highway now, you're going to find a fast charger, which is kind of what you want if you're doing a road trip. It charges your car in maybe half an hour, up to about 80% charge. You want that kind of speed when you're on the road. But you'll find one of those every, depending on where you are, every 100, 150, 200 kilometers. So you can do it now. It takes a little bit of planning, but you can do it.
Wow. But if you just simply have a smartphone with you when you're driving on the major roads in Canada, it's pretty easy to access the information as to where the next charging station is. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, lots of apps. There's lots of different charging networks out there now. It's just that they just don't have coverage everywhere necessarily. But there's quite a bit of it. So yeah, most of them have their own apps, and then there are apps that basically consolidate all the different charging networks, and those are quite helpful. They'll even tell you what the users will post on those apps and tell you if there's a problem with a charger. There's been nothing worse than getting to a charger and finding it's not working, something like that. It doesn't happen that often, but it can. But anyway, yeah, definitely it syncs in with your phone. A lot of cars, newer cars, certainly if you buy an EV now, most of them have onboard software that you can plug in, and the car itself will tell you where to go.
Brian Banks, thank you very much for your help. We'll be chatting with you from time to time as this EV revolution continues. Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, Charles. Really appreciate it.
Brian Banks is the editorial director for Electric Autonomy Canada. He owns an electric vehicle, and so he knows of what he speaks. In the last few days, we have been talking about the incident in New York, and we have more information now on who did what. And yes, there's been an arrest made in the hate crime, I have to call it that, the hate crime committed against a 65-year-old Filipino woman, an immigrant to America, who someday will be another, quote, Asian American. However, we had an incident today right here in Canada, not far from our microphone. I want to bring in your calls to ask you what you would say to the people involved in the incident. So that'll come up right after a piece of fresh Canadian common sense. It is a Wednesday night in Canada. We're into a brand new pandemic, according to Dr. Michael Warner, who should know he's an ICU physician in Toronto. I just want everyone, as much as is possible, to please be as safe as possible, especially coming into the holiday. It's Good Friday this Friday, and by the way, we will have a best of show this Friday and also on Easter Monday. For those celebrating Passover right now, have a happy Passover. And of course, in the coming days, I want everyone to have a happy Easter as well. This is Charles Anthony.
As you know, Frank Leo's achieved the...
I didn't prepare, so I could have rolled the joint. I don't have to, but I wanted to.
Pre-record the statement.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. People all over the world have to face a new problem in 2020, the corona crisis, and have to bear the impacts caused by the pandemic on the economy and on our everyday lives. In addition to the health crisis, we all still have to face two monumental challenges that threaten our very existence: climate change and biodiversity loss. 5 years ago, the international community reached an agreement in Paris on keeping global warming to below 2 degrees centigrade, and if possible, below 1.5 degrees.
Can we use
We have yet to make similar progress on biodiversity.
The commies are way ahead of
For
us.
too long, we
Soviets are way
believed
ahead of us.
that biodiversity could be protected
Say
simply
socialist?
by
Yes,
creating
I did.
national
Crap.
parks.
Eat your jello. I'm going to eat your
Conservation
jello.
is important, but it's not enough in itself. We have to rethink our economic model. We need to apply safeguards to financial flows in order to ensure that investment projects do not have a negative impact on biodiversity. Governments must gear their financial incentives and subsidies towards sustainable production methods that do not harm the environment. It is clear that environment ministers alone cannot solve the problem. This UN General Assembly Summit is an opportunity for heads of state and government to recognize their responsibility to ensure that production does not take place at the expense of nature and therefore also of people. I am convinced that the private sector as well realizes that exploiting, polluting, and even destroying nature will not pay dividends in the medium term. Quite simply, without a natural environment, We humans no longer have a basis for survival, let alone
Well, we
for
could have built a whole
economic
bunch of types
activity.
of, like, if we could have totally
This
improved our
global
housing to
challenge
modern day
requires
best
a global
practices and
solution.
standards.
The international community adopted the Paris to mitigate climate change.
So creative, top of
Now
every hour.
we
You
want
did
to
it- you've done
adopt
this
an
every
ambitious
hour.
framework to stop the loss of biodiversity. We need strict, mandatory, and accessible global rules. Switzerland fully endorses the call of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People to protect 30% of our planet's surface. We intend to stop the spread of settlements. In other words, we have a fixed and net zero goal for land use change. Next year, we will adopt a new global framework at the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. I am confident that this framework will encourage all actors to conserve natural ecosystems and to sustainably manage our use of the environment and curb pollution. We have to work hard to deliver the CBD's 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. This is in the interest of us all throughout the world.
Your connection is unstable, surprise. Your connection is unstable, surprise. Please keep it up, Mr. Saddest pedophile in the world. Would you fuck
Mr.
off?
President,
Go kill yourself.
I have the great honor to introduce the pre-recorded statement of His Majesty King Abdullah II of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I thank you.
On the hour, every hour, this motherfucker is so creative.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
2 minutes ahead of time.
Your Excellencies, dear friends, it is a pleasure to join you for this important meeting on an urgent issue that literally concerns the future of our world and all life in it. We have been talking about sustainable development, climate change, and safeguarding the environment for decades. But unfortunately, have little to show for it.
You've been talking about it, but you've been lying.
We have not stopped the 2016 Paris Agreement to strengthen the global response to climate change, nor have we met its goals to prevent a global temperature rise. Nature itself is now
We burn
in
off all this
existential
methane before
peril.
it kills us,
Its
please.
sustainability for future generations in jeopardy, and the impact on food security
I want to sell
humanity's
uranium
very
cakes to
existence.
Iran before
No
somebody
country
else
is more aware
does.
of the dangers of climate shifts than Jordan, the second water-poorest country in the world. To help address this crisis, over the last 2 years, Jordan has prepared an actionable solution
Every time they
that will be
misbehave, we'll come back and take them
to the
back.
UNGA, and with all your help, can make a difference. We are attempting by proposing a charter that protects and extends the legal right to exist to selected ecosystems and all species.
Every
of flora
ecosystem
and
doesn't
fauna,
deserve that.
to advance the causes of preserving enough of nature for human civilization to continue and thrive, and empower the world's environmental activists and others to take legal action on behalf of nature's rights. We
He said
owe
he's
this
going
to
to
the
do this all
future
fucking night.
generations.
If I mention it or don't
COVID-19
mention it,
has
he
taught
does
us
this for as
all
long
a
as,
lesson.
yeah, keep it up.
We
This is
cannot
on like
keep
a
neglecting
every
nature
minute
and
cycle.
its At no time has
So
practical,
creative, these fucking
principled
idiots.
global action been needed more than at present to save our environment.
Feel? What? 100? Mary, that's awful. Oh, your temperature. I thought you meant the doctor, Bill. Anyway, I'm glad you're feeling better. And Mary, what? Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'll call you tomorrow. Goodbye. What'd you thank you for, boss? Well, everybody's been sending her flowers and fruit and candy, and so I thought I'd be a little different. What did you send? A bowl of chili.
He's going to happen every fucking minute.
Anyway, looks like Miss Livingston will be back on the program next week.
Connection or whatever.
I'll get it.
Dumbest fucking shit.
Da-da-dee-da-dum, da-dum-da-dee.
got caught perusing the wrong websites.
Well,
You're mad that I keep pointing out that's where you found those scripts, is where you had to have found it.
I'm sorry I'm 3 days late with the rent on our house, but here it is. Thank you. Oh, by the way, Mr. Benny, our hot water heater is leaking. You think maybe you could have it fixed? Well, plumbing costs are awfully high now. I guess they are. But it's been months since you promised to paint the living room. Well, I fixed the hole in the roof myself. Good. Well, I guess I'll be running along. Goodbye, Mr. Benny.
Oh, by the way, Mr. Brown, how's your wife? What's she doing now?
Oh, haven't you heard? She writes that radio program, The Mean Old Man.
Oh, yeah, I listen to it every day. Your wife has quite an imagination.
Yeah, imagination. Goodbye, Mr. Benny. Goodbye.
Who was it, boss? Mr. Brown from Long Beach. Oh, you know, he's been complaining a long time about a hole in the roof. It's fixed. Boss, I don't remember you sending anyone down to fix it. If I say it's fixed, it's fixed. If you don't believe me, listen to tomorrow's episode and you'll find out. By the way, Rochester, has my television script arrived from CBS? No, not yet, boss. My director, Ralph Levy, will be here soon to go over it with me. I wonder what's holding it up. Oh, that must be it now. Come in.
Oh, hello, Mr. Benny.
Oh, it's you, Dennis. Come on in.
Well, thank you.
How do you feel, kid?
Fine, thanks.
How are your folks?
They're fine, too.
That's good.
Especially my father. After 6 months, they finally took the cast off his foot.
In a cast for 6 months? Dennis, what was wrong with your father's foot?
Nothing. He stepped into a bucket of cement.
Look, Dennis, kid. I can understand your father stepping in a bucket of cement. I can almost understand him standing there letting the cement dry. But why would he keep it on his foot for 6 months?
My mother made him.
What?
When he stayed out late at night, he couldn't tiptoe into the house.
That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard of. Imagine your mother making him keep his foot in a bucket for 6 months.
2 weeks ago, it came in handy.
How?
They were invited to a masquerade, and Papa went as a potted palm.
Little kid, do me a favor, will you?
Do what?
As long as you got your mouth open, sing, don't talk.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're a noisy motherfucker.
Nikki says the guy stands up and pours coffee on the ground, and that's caught on video, okay? But that's not the worst of this. It's followed by the lady, his wife. She's in her 70s. She passes by Nikki and pours the coffee in her mug onto her face, right? So she's pouring hot coffee on the face of the person managing this little coffee shop, and then says, F you, Chinese. Nikki can then be seen on this tape grabbing the woman. They argue before going outside. Nikki turns her phone on to record what's happening. And as they're getting in the car, the man says to Nikki, leave it be, and then explains that his wife is not well. That's what he says. And then he is grumbling as he gets into the car. And you can make out the words effing. I'll just say effing. We know what the word is. As he gets into his car, he's grumbling, effing Chinese. I'm going to put a pause on the story there. I could give you more, but I'd rather hear your voice here, okay? What do you want to say to people who are doing this stuff? These are not career criminals. They're not serial killers. I'm not suggesting that they're going to be going into schools and shooting people or into coffee shops. So I know some people say Chuck's making too much of this. It's not the most serious story in the world. We had another shooting today in Orange, California. I get that. And we do cover those stories. But I want to cover this one because it's core. It goes to what you were speaking about so eloquently on this show yesterday. But when I asked the question, do we really believe that we're all equal? I mean, clearly, we can only judge our own beliefs by how we act upon them. If we're not consistent, if we're acting in a way that's different from what we're talking about, then clearly we don't believe as strongly in these things as we say we do. Now, it's clear that those two folks, the customers, who are either throwing in the face of the coffee store manager, it's clear that they don't believe that we're all equal. It's clear that they believe that they are to be served, they are to be gratified, they are to be pleasured, they are to be serviced by this woman who's an Asian woman, and how dare she tell them where to sit? How dare she enforce the public health rules? Who is she to tell them? And so they're using the words effing Chinese and some other words. So my question is, what is your message to those folks? Not just the message to those people who are throwing coffee in the face of the Chinese Canadian. What's your message to those people who don't